What feeds effort? What feeds motivation? What feeds victory? With the most advanced scientific research, with the quality of the best ingredients, protecting people's health without banned substances and with transparency. Crown Sport Nutrition, your personal best brand.
Hello, good afternoon everybody. Thanks for being here. I would like to say welcome to this second session of sports training of our program, sports training and nutrition. And during the first talk of this afternoon, we have Carlos Lago. Carlos, thanks for being with us today, especially opening this session. Carlos will speak a little bit about how we can help the athlete and how we can learn faster in football and team sports. He has a vast international experience as a coach and specialization in football. He's a professor at the University of Vigo. He's a professor of the High Performance Master of our university school, Real Madrid, training and nutrition in our program. So, Carlos, welcome. Thank you very much. The floor is all yours for you to give the talk. Thank you very much, Guillermo, for your introduction. So first and foremost, it's a great honor to me to be here. Master of Sports Nutrition and Training is a role model all around the world for its good results for almost 2 decades. And I think that this is a very good way to communicate, to get along, and to have a forum to exchange knowledge. I'm going to share my presentation. So its title is How to Help the Athlete to Learn Quicker in Football and Team Sports. So I think that we have a very important idea that everybody that works in football or team sports should have. And the point is that training, the specialties, is about exchanging information. Football or basketball, handball are not a matter of number of repetitions, not because of doing 20 repetitions compared to 10. It means that we're going to train better, and it's not a matter of time. The longer we train, the better we will play. That's not the point. It's a matter of training well. And training well has to do with that information exchange that happens between the coach and the players, or between the players and the coach, because processes are always in both directions. I'm going to insist on this presentation on the fact that football or team sports are taught, because we need to give our hands to players to help them identify what are the most important aspects of the context where they participate in order to make the best decisions. So what is helping a player improve? This is quite a recent video where we can see a player of Bayer Leverkusen trying to kick a full kick, and he is enabled to reach level of success that he would like to have. So his coach gets close to him, Xavi Alonso, and just with a specific indication for the needs of this player, he's able to speed up his learning so that he's able to be successful in the task immediately. Let's watch the video. He can't do it, so Xavi Alonso comes along. And he does what he wants to do. So to speed up the learning is to accomplish that the players that you work with acquire the knowledge or the experiences that are necessary for the coach in order to grow as players in a quicker way and in order to increase the odds for success or to win. So it's important to understand that in football, the success equals talent, the level that the players have, plus methodology. Methodology speaks about every procedure, every strategy, every resource that a coach manages in order to help his players improve. So I think that it's important that we understand that there are several combinations. When you have players with a great talent and you have good training sessions, the improvement is quite important. If your team doesn't have much talent but you train well, you improve quite a lot. Not as much as at the first level, but you improve quite a lot. If you have talent but you don't have good training sessions, you will improve a little bit. And if you have no talent and you do not train well, you won't improve at all. So I think that the success equation in order to win, or in order to try to win, would be a mixture between talent and methodology, or the fact of knowing how to train. So I think it is very important that some concepts are very well known by coaches and players. I think that in football, training sessions, in team sports, the coaches have to be very demanding. I would say that at any age, you are demanding when you ask for something that depends on that person, that is under this person's control. For example, effort. For example, to do things that only depend on his will. But you put pressure when these things are out of people's control. For example, if you're asking a player to score 2 goals in a game, or when you're asking a player to steal the ball 3 times to the rival, it does not only depend on him, it depends on other players' actions. So the level of demand is an empowerment condition to improve. So the ones that work in training should remove that slogan that is quite common and frequent that says that the important thing would be to participate. This is fake. I mean, this is quite an important mistake. The important thing is not to participate. The important thing is to be self-demanding at the top level, to be committed in order to give your 100%, because we know that in sport and life, if you don't make an effort in what you're doing, the level you would reach will always be below the one that you could reach if you commit at the maximum level. A different story would be that we can't put pressure on our players, asking them for things that go beyond their control, to be champions, to score a goal, not to be scored a goal. These are things that only increase the pressure on players. So, how can we help players develop skills and behaviors to improve their performance during competition? It's quite easy to discover that some experts of the football training explain what kind of sessions they hold, what kind of tasks they propose. So this is a session on the internet where someone defends the good things of their sessions. And I can say that this session is not very well designed. Why? Because it has a total amount of 9 targets. And as we will see throughout this presentation, when you provide too much information to someone that is listening to you, the most probable thing is that almost every message you convey will never arrive. If you want to be sure that a piece of information or an important message arrives to someone, you have just to say one thing. Besides of having 9 targets, this person is not conveying information to the players about what are the keys that they need to pay attention to in order to be successful in accumulating passes, to occupy space in a rational way. But you are not explaining either how you're going to reinforce the player's behavior during the session. So I think that this kind of sessions, it's about understanding that to do the things more times is to improve, and that's not true. Training sessions are based in football that every team has different needs. That's why we don't have the 10 perfect tasks to improve passes. We have the best tasks for my team, for my players, and especially for my way of intervening. So, I'm going to give some keys for what would be to speed up the learning of the players that you're working with. It's quite clear, as we were seeing with Grimaldo, the Bayer Leverkusen player, that players can learn many skills without anybody. But I'm sure that the participation of a good coach could facilitate this learning to be better and quicker. And how can we make this happen? So 3 recommendations, 3 specific tips. In each and one of the tasks that we propose in the training session, no matter it's a warm-up, it's a central part of the session, when we go back to when we are relaxing, when we are stretching, we need to set the target. It's about explaining very clearly what the target is of the exercise that we are going to do in a minute. There's a sentence on Forrest Gump movie where the main actor says, if you don't know what you're going to look for, you don't know if you found it. If players don't know what the task is about, what do we want to accomplish, very possibly we will be wasting time. To set the task goal has to be very quickly, just 10 seconds. So the target of this task is to improve the short pass, for example. Second stage, to speed up that learning, would be to give players the keys that they need to pay attention to. That is, we're going to describe what they have to look at in order to accomplish the goal. We need to answer 2 questions. What are the keys to be successful? What should I pay attention at during the exercise? If a coach has a very deep knowledge of his sport, football, basketball, whatever, he would be able to give just a few keys, but they are the most important ones to be successful. In the case of the short pass, for example, the attention keys will have to do with the fact that the passes have to be quick, have to be with the inner side of the foot, and they will have to be they'll have to go on the ground. So we give a pair of goggles to our players so that as they are performing this task, they are just paying attention to making these passes and with every feature that was just mentioned. And for the coach, these are the 3 keys that allow the coach to be successful. Obviously, depending on the goal that the exercise has, the attention keys that are given to the players are different. And this is a matter of concern for me. Because let's imagine that we're, for example, at a math lesson. Nobody would think of having a teacher that gets into the classroom, says that today we're going to work on Neperian logarithms, and suddenly he distributes a piece of papers with some exercises, and he allows them to solve them on their own. It's like, okay, so given the solution, everybody would say, well, this teacher doesn't have pedagogic capacity, he's unable to explain it. But in football and in team sports, this is quite usual. The coach sets a task and he allows the players to do it without helping them identify what are the most important aspects, or without them knowing how they have to do it. So to contribute the attention keys helps players learn quicker, because they focus their attention on the aspects that will allow them to solve the task given by the coach in a successful way. I'm sure that out of every task, we will have the possibility of indicating many different things that could be taken into account. But if you give too many behavior keys, if you have to pay attention to many things at the same time, the most probable thing is that I forget everything. So it's about giving just a few hints as far as they are helpful for the players to be successful. So a coach that wants to help their players at any performance level explains what the exercise is about, and he justifies or he explains the 2 or 3 keys on which that we have to pay attention to in order to be successful. And last but not least, on point number 3, during the exercise passing, the 15, 20, 10 minutes that the task lasts, is about correcting the aspects that are related to the exercise target. So, for example, if you're working on passes and one of your players is defending 1-to-1 in a mistaken way, if you decide to correct him, that player will change his focus to 1-to-1. So suddenly, the attention keys that have to do with the initial target of the exercise will disappear. Tense pass with the inner side and a ground pass. So it's about reinforcing, correcting, and exchanging information just about the aspects that are related to the exercise goals and with the attention keys. If the coach finds out that there are some aspects that don't have to do with the exercise goal that are not being developed in the right way, it will be the time at a different session or at a different exercise of proposing a new task with a different exercise, with a different goal, to contribute the attention keys and to correct only the aspects that have to do with the exercise goal. And we can understand this as the training methodology. To me, this way of understanding the training session doesn't have to do either with the age or the level that the players have. The main difference is the work goal, the working goal with, for example, with 8, 9, 10-year players. The tasks that have to do with the relationship with the ball at the top level, with joint behaviors of the team, and the behavior keys, well, same idea. Maybe at the top level you can give additional tips, and when the kids are very young, just 1 or 2 tips, that's it. And to correct would be the best way, to help players keep their focus on what you want during that task development. So if I was a coach that wanted to improve, I would take 3 tasks of a session that has been performed short ago, and I would do as follows. I would explain it just with a few words what the goal is, just 10 or 20 seconds. I would describe what the players have to pay attention to in order to accomplish this goal, just 30 or 40 seconds. And I would describe what feedback, what support I'm going to deliver during that time. So, when we start training, sometimes our excessive activation as coaches make us talk too much, and sometimes it makes us make mistakes. So, if I ask everybody that is watching us, or whenever, people that are watching this conference, and I ask them, how many of you have ever said to a player, stay focused, as a way to help them be successful in the action that they're going to take subsequently? I'm sure that almost everybody would raise his or her hand. Okay, everybody that is following this presentation. And as we will see in a minute, to say someone stay focused doesn't help the player at all. Why? Because to stay focused, to be concentrated, is to put focus on something very specific. When the coach tells a player, for example, for a fall kick, he says, concentrate, that's an empty sentence, and sentence that has no content for the player, especially the younger they are. We are not helping them, because to concentrate in a fall kick could be, for example, to kick with our third system. So, for example, Pablo with the inside foot, for example, Pablo is thinking of 2 things: to give an inside foot pass and to do a good job. So now I am setting that concentration. To concentrate is to put attention on something very specific. So this is why when we ask him, tell him, let's stay focused or concentrate, we're not helping him be successful. He's successful when he gets the tips to put the focus in what I think that is relevant to be successful. And the recommendation is easy. In that concentration process, we have just to put our attention focus on something very specific. So it is about conveying just one message each time, or as much, or two maximum. Well, the attention, we know that it's limited, okay, and that's a good idea to use it for the most relevant aspects. We shouldn't waste that limited capacity of concentration in aspects that are not paramount for success. You have an example here on, well, there's a football player that is called Fontana that is going to play. And his coach wants to help him be successful. He says, well, I want you to do this and that, but be a striker, but be a defender. Stop next to the four-line room picking in diagonal, send passes in first way, some inside foot passes, act as a joker, as a kit man, and the amount of information is terrible. The only thing that the coach has done is that the player is absolutely out of focus because there's nothing specific to think of. That excess of information is a great risk for the players because nobody gets more than one or two messages, one or two key messages, but the coach is a great resource to be happy with himself of the good explanation he has just given and how good he has helped the player. He says, hey, by the way, did you get it? Did you understand me? I don't know any player that after receiving an explanation, a 10-minute explanation, that knows nothing. I know no one that says, hey, I haven't understood anything. That's a tricky question because that's not the way of confirming that a player has understood what you wanted to tell him. So let's see what solution we have. If you want to be sure that a player has received the information, that what you've told him has arrived to him and he remembers it, that is, he is focused, you have to tell him, hey, put me an example of. Give me an example of. So if there's a 2-minute explanation and in the end I say, okay, so give an example of this. Who's doing a good job with this? There's no way out. You either know how to answer it or not. And if I want to strengthen that information conveyance to help you understand what I'm trying to transmit, the idea would be, I give you an example of. That is, in order to reinforce the information that I'm giving you, I finish my intervention, I put you an example of. And if I want to confirm that you've received the message correctly, give me an example of. I think that these are very interesting resources. So let's try to watch a video of a football coach. I hope that you can hear the audio. To will, ambition. We have a lot of time to look for, to try to see what we're looking for, and we are trying to reach to the point of giving as little information as possible. Sometimes it's like, well, I have to say this to the striker so that if he scores a goal, no, we are done with that. Thanks to Joaquin and our staff. Just minimum information, necessary information, the unavoidable information, the one that is vital, and especially the one that is going to be fulfilled, the one that the player can fulfill. So, for example, 5 ideas, 5 different aspects of the game, but you won't be able to interpret that. Okay, so just not to be frustrated as a coach, no worries. I've already accepted that. There's a very good sentence, by the way, that Nasser Paul says, if I had time, I would have sent a shorter letter. So this is the reflection we do with the players. We will devote a lot of months to see what's the message that I'm going to give you so that you're able to assimilate it. And later, although what the players say is, okay, did you get it? So did you understand it? They say, yeah. You say, yes, but let's see that on the pitch. So if you didn't understand it, I'm going to see it.
As you can see, in this case, Luis Enrique, manager of the Spanish international team, Barcelona, and in this case PSG, is not giving a lot of information, just one takeaway message at a time. And then perhaps, yes, he needs to come up with a different way of verifying that the information has been properly received. But anyway, when we come up with a new task for a player, there are basically three areas they move along: a comfort zone, a learning zone, and a panic zone. Now, managers need to be expert at coming up with tasks which have been adjusted to the player's level, so that if a player is performing a task and making few mistakes, then they'll feel comfortable. Then if we introduce a task where players make mistakes, they keep on practicing, and then they get better, that would be the learning zone. But then there's also a panic zone where players simply can't perform the tasks. These are the three areas. And once again, managers, coaches need to be good, quite expert at figuring out what sort of level the tasks they come up with fall under. So, comfort zone is a task which can be performed properly every single time, or almost that often. Then learning zone is an area where players are learning, they make mistakes, but they are learning. And then panic zone is basically a task that almost never is performed successfully, and that creates, of course, panic. It's unsettling to the player. And managers need to be able to understand that there exist three great obstacles to learning, things that hamper learning: the absence of self-criticism, the external attribution of errors and mistakes, and the habitual use of excuses. When a task is not performed successfully, or it is performed but not as successfully as expected, and players blame their mistakes on external factors, well, they're not progressing, are they? And being able to self-assess is a critical skill as well, because it allows players to keep on growing. Mind you, when players say it was the referee's fault, the grass hadn't been cut, the temperature was too hot, we played at 9 and we thought we'd play at 8, I didn't eat well last night, I'm not feeling comfortable. Whenever players blame others for their mistakes, when they blame external circumstances for their mistakes, well, they're not progressing. It's dangerous. And the final issue is, well, when a player habitually uses excuses, such as, for example, the ball hadn't been inflated properly. All of these things are the enemies of learning, and those of us who work in coaching and training need to make sure that our young players never make these mistakes. They need to understand, our players, that errors, mistakes are but opportunities to learn. Now, if there's a game on Wednesday and then another game on Sunday, and the player performs poorly on Wednesday, and so we run the risk that the self-confidence of that player, of all of our players, may plummet, then in that case it could prove tempting to blame others for the squad's mistake. The manager at that point could say, it was the ref's fault, don't worry about it. Because you're protecting your players, you don't want their self-confidence to plummet. But if mistakes are made consistently over a period of 2 weeks perhaps, then okay, we've won, but we need to take a good look at how we've performed and figure out how we can get better. So it all depends on the psychological needs of your squad at every single point in time. So there may be occasions where the manager might want to place the blame externally, but players should never do it. And at a very high level anyway, it all depends on the characteristics of the work week we're going through at any given time. And once again, managers, coaches need to be good, adept at figuring out what the specific needs of our players are. Another very important thing to understand and be aware of is that when it comes to football and team sports, there exist different solutions to the same problem. If there's like in this case, there's a fence, a bar, what's best? To jump over it? To duck under it? It doesn't matter as long as you get past the fence. But the player's ability to assess critically what is going on around them is absolutely key. And that's something that the manager can nurture. If managers really are curtailing their players' creativity and sense of responsibility, that's no good. When we need our players, for example, to be focused, what is it we should do and what is it we shouldn't do? We have to inform players about the aspects of the game they should pay attention to. What is it we shouldn't do? Let's not tell players to stay focused. What is it we should do? Feed them one piece of information at a time, maybe two. What we shouldn't do is give them as much information as possible all at once. What is it we should do? Talk about what they can improve. What we shouldn't do is talk about the things that they did wrong more than once. If right now I tell all of you, please don't look at the red square on the screen. Now, I'm asking you not to do it, but as soon as I say it, immediately you will do precisely that. When you tell players not to do something, they'll go out on the pitch thinking about what they shouldn't do, and inevitably they will end up doing it. It's like a father telling his son not to let go of the handlebar whilst learning how to go on a bike. They'll do it immediately. Tell them what they should do. Don't tell them what they shouldn't do. If I want the ball to be passed around slowly, instead of saying, don't pass the ball too quickly, let's just say, pass the ball slowly, close to the ground. Another very important thing, I think one of the most important aspects in high-level performance sports for those of us who work with players is that we need to help them find out what their optimal activation level is. What do I mean by that? If I'm highly active at any given point in time, I'm likely, eventually, to experience a decrease in performance. Why? Because if I'm agitated, that's going to happen eventually. On the other hand, if I am quite inactive, if I'm not exactly firing on all cylinders, I'm also unlikely to perform properly because I simply don't have the energy to do it. So you need to strike a middle ground, to strike a balance between the two. Let's take a look at a video of Cristiano Ronaldo. He was about to take a penalty. A fan pointed a laser beam at his face. He breaks his concentration, and let's see what happens. Okay, so he complains about the laser. He realizes, he gets agitated and rectifies that. He breathes in out. That's his routine. That's the routine he has to readjust his activation level. He closes his eyes. He breathes in deep. He possibly visualizes where he's going to shoot the ball. He breathes out and then he takes the penalty. Players who are, well, that good are that good because they have an incredible tactical and technical level, but also because they have sufficient resources and assets to ensure that they're always properly prepared, psychologically speaking. And in this case, this aspect proved absolutely key. At any performance level, I think managers should devote a lot of time to provide players with routines, series and sets of actions they should perform before taking action. If we want to teach our players how to properly warm up or how to properly stretch, well, that's great. And it's just as important to teach them how to keep their energy levels in check, to be aware of how they're feeling at any given point in time. Because if a player is either too calm or too agitated, that's not good. That's not conducive to achieving a good performance. And so, how do we achieve that? How do we get players to relax or to wind themselves up a little more? Well, they can train their thought to do that. We can give them visualization exercises. We can give them a routine which can help them achieve the ideal activation level and concentrate at any given time. Concentrating, after all, means remembering what they need to do to be successful, to successfully perform a task. That's what a routine does. It enables players to control their energy levels, to keep them in check. We won't be looking at this video, I don't think. This is Rafa Nadal's routine before a game. This is always the same routine that Nadal performs, and it allows him to concentrate on what's about to happen. Well, the present, really. He forgets all about anything and everything that's happened before and entirely focuses on what is about to happen. This routine helps him focus his attention on the task he's about to perform. When energy levels aren't optimal, problems occur, especially at a high level. Let's say Team A has a strength of 9, and they're poised to play Team B with a strength of 7. Even if they're poorly activated, they can win. And if they enter the game with a poor level of activation, whereas Team B approaches the game with the ideal activation level, their respective strengths become readjusted. It's not a technical issue. It's not a tactical issue. It's all about energy levels. And that is why psychological preparation doesn't necessarily improve performance per se, no matter how good my psychological preparation may be for my players. I can't ask them to do something that's impossible. I can mentally prepare as much as I want, but I won't be able to jump 8 meters high. I just won't. But if I'm asking myself to perform a task I'm capable of executing, then psychological preparation will come in handy. So for all those of you who work with teams, I'd like to, show you this. This is something Pepe Marie once said about non-forced errors. Non-forced errors are basically mistakes that do not boil down to a lack of preparation from the player or to a better activation level from the opponent. And mistakes like these can occur at any point at any time at all during a game. When they happen early on in the game, it's because our activation level hasn't been optimal. And then we need to find a better way of warming up our players. Or perhaps because we haven't helped them reach the ideal level of focus. If it happens later on during the game, it's a concentration issue. Players aren't exactly thinking about what they should be thinking about. And if mistakes, silly mistakes, non-forced errors are made at the end of the game, it's because they simply can't handle the pressure. So these are three separate issues, three different problems, which should be tackled differently. Now, coaches must have emotional control if they are to help their players improve better. If you can't control your emotions, you can't be a good player. If one of your players is sent off the pitch, your players will need you to come up with a new strategy for this new scenario that's come about. But if your reaction to that red card is, kicking a bucket, or getting angry, having a fit, and you get sent off, you're not helping them. And that's your fault because you haven't mastered your emotions. Coaches must have emotional control. And to me, a great example of a great manager who has always displayed great emotional control, he's very, very good at figuring out what their players need. I remember in a Champions League final, Cristiano was poised to take a penalty. Zidane got close to him, whispered something into his ear, and Cristiano Ronaldo started laughing. Why did he do it? Because Zidane realized that he was wound up. At that point, a player in that state doesn't need more advice, more instructions. They need to have a laugh, try and relax a bit, achieve the optimal level of control for themselves. And that's something that Zidane was able to provide Ronaldo with. And if Zidane himself had been agitated, he wouldn't have been able to do it. Now, this type of emotional control that I'm talking about can be achieved by coaches. How? Well, they need to ask themselves a few questions. First one is, what level of activation do I need to perform this task correctly? Second question, what activation level am I at now? You need to be able to interpret the signals that your body is sending off. Let's say you're at level 9 activation. Is that too much? Well, you have to bring it down a notch. And the conclusion of my presentation is now drawing near. So I'd like to talk about this. How do we know when a manager has done everything right? When a manager has correctly geared and designed the tasks to be performed during training? Well, if a manager's goal is to have his players improve passing, then he needs to design tasks precisely for that purpose. Why is it that during a game they can't pass properly, their players, your players? Is it because there isn't enough space? Is it because there's too much space, too much distance? Look at that, see where they can improve, and design tasks accordingly. That's number one. And the second thing is, you should bear in mind that the task you design should be achievable. Your players should be able to perform that task successfully. Thirdly, your players need to be able to figure out why it is that they've performed the task successfully. How can they do it? You tell them what the keys to success are, you reinforce that concept, and then eventually they perform the task successfully. And finally, the difficulty level should be adequate. Remember, comfort zone, learning zone, panic zone. When tasks are slightly above your player's performance level, meaning that they can't quite perform it now, but they will be able to in the future, well, that's the magic of training. That's the sweet spot where your helping your players achieve their goals, when you're helping them improve. I actually had a lot more slides, but I'm afraid we're running slightly late. We're a little behind schedule, so if you want to send me any questions, this is my contact information. Feel free to fire an email or a tweet my way, and I'll be happy to respond. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Carlos. This was very interesting. Once again, thank you for joining us here today. We'll have a short break now, and we'll be back very, very soon. Thank you.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid formamos jugadores para que lleguen a primer equipo, sino que también formamos personas.
Venga, hasta luego a todos. Buenas
Uno
tardes.
como estudiante viene aquí para ver, ¿verdad?, cómo uno puede crecer como profesional, y es el inicio de ese proceso de crecimiento profesional que la universidad nos está brindando.
Elegí en su momento estudiar aquí por el prestigio que supone el Real Madrid, la marca, y también la Universidad Europea.
Creo que es de las mejores opciones que puedo elegir estar en el Real Madrid. Solo la marca Real Madrid ya te abre muchísimas puertas.
Vale.
Campeones se pueden formar en todos los aspectos de la vida. Lo importante es saber ser un campeón.
Cuando quieres mejorar cada día, no estar satisfecho con lo que hiciste ayer, creo que para mí eso es lo que te hace ganar.
Realmente lo que más se aprende es a establecer nuevos contactos. Eso es imprescindible para los proyectos profesionales.
Pero nuestro espíritu ganador nos caracteriza, y nos caracteriza no porque lo decimos nosotros, sino porque nos reconocen los demás.
Yo creo que la llave para tener éxito es hacer algo que lo pueda hacer con pasión.
El trabajo en equipo se mantenga independientemente del resultado.
Esos valores se adquieren cuando tú ya tienes ese compromiso desde que entras al club, ¿no? Y pues al final tú vas haciendo una especie de pasar el testigo con los que van viniendo después.
Y tener las herramientas y los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poder liderar una transformación que tiene que darse ya en este tipo de industria.
There's really no other opportunity like this in the world.
Vale, no hay problema. Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid.
Bueno, seguimos esta tarde de ponencias.
Welcome back, everyone. After this short break, let's pick up where we left off. Carlos, welcome, and thank you very much for being here with us. Carlos is a doctor. His talk will be about stimulus and fatigue and training geared towards muscular hypertrophy. An update on scientific literature. He's an expert and a researcher in neuromuscular physiology, an expert in strength training, professor, scientific consultant, PT, and he'll be covering a huge portion of a very important part of our Masters in Training. Thank you very much for the invitation. Today I'll be talking about stimulus and fatigue in strength training. We'll be talking about what it is that engenders muscular hypertrophy. We'll be talking about training targets, and we'll be talking about planning. I'll be giving you some updates about the literature, the current state of the art of scientific literature. It is a lot of information, of course, but let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm a PhD in sports sciences. I'm a professor and researcher with various different research groups, particularly the two you see on the screen. Furthermore, I always like to talk about my passion for sport. I went from practicing football to practicing karate, and then professional bodybuilding. And so muscular hypertrophy, as you can imagine, is something I love talking about because I have some experience in it and because I've been researching it myself. Aside from that, I'm also co-director of our Masters in Physiology Applied to Personal Training and co-director of research and development of the Life Pro Nutrition company. That's something I always like to say because there may be a little bit of a conflict of interests there. I wanted to disclose that. Now, early on in my career, and this is me, I loved studying the mechanics of muscular hypertrophy. As you know, muscular hypertrophy is all about building neural pathways and reinforcing the muscle. But we'll be talking about it in detail. We'll be talking about performance, strength training. I'll be giving you some practical tips based on my personal experience. This is the content of my presentation. So we'll be talking about the mechanisms and the mechanics of muscular hypertrophy as of 2024, what happens when we train, and so on and so forth. Muscular hypertrophy. Now, it's becoming a little more fashionable to research this in sports sciences, but when I started studying, when I did my master's even, people didn't seem to care about this as much. It was something that researchers seemed to be uninterested in, but nowadays, on the other hand, we know that it's not only very good for your health, also, when it comes to other sports, combat sports, obviously, but also powerlifting, bodybuilding, it's quite useful to optimize your training, to gear your training based on the characteristics of your physique and your body, the natural characteristics of your body. And some very interesting studies have been conducted into team sports, specifically football, which show that when it comes to comparing professional athletes to amateurs, a big difference in sprinting capacity is muscular hypertrophy, precisely. It's quite apparent that as one progresses through their professional career, the level of muscle mass that we have in our bodies tends to always increase, and that's why they can jump higher or run faster, professional athletes. Muscle tissue, if used, leads to acute and chronic adaptations that are very, very good for our health. Now, for those of you who are listening to this, you're the future professionals of our sector, and you'd always need to bear in mind that muscular hypertrophy can be incredibly useful for athletes for extended periods of time. When I was doing my BA, I used to train at the gym at the university, and I realized that the vast majority of people who walk through a sports center's door, well, their goal is to improve their shape, both aesthetically and functionally. That's why it's important to talk about muscular hypertrophy. What is it? It's an increase in the size of our muscles. It's very simple. Now, this can happen either because there is an abundance of minerals and vitamins and other substances, but we're not interested in that. We want our muscles to increase in size because of our protein intake, myofibrillar proteins specifically. Obviously, at one point, a balance will be struck between sarcoplasmatic and myofibrillar hypertrophies, but that's what we want.
In muscular hypertrophy, it's true that genetics plays a role, and it plays a key role, but although there are researches when you can see that between 10 and 40 times more genetics play a role rather than the optimization of the training session in the odds that we have when we are born, it's better to play them as good as possible in order to reach the goal we have. However, it's important to take into account that in high sports performance, especially teamwork, we don't need a very big hypertrophy in order to optimize performance for what we need. So in this sense, we're going to speak a little bit about what's the stimulus, what triggers the muscle hypertrophy, that increase of fibers in the muscle. And I have to quote Brand Schoffeland of this paper that was published in 2010 when he proposed the three main mechanisms. First of all, whether the muscle grows because of the stimulus caused by the mechanical tension. And what's that tension? It's just the power that we have in our muscle fibers when we contract our muscles. That's it. These forces that are generated both actively and passively. On the other hand, the second mechanism that he proposed was the metabolic stress, that metabolite accumulation that happens during the activity that we are performing. For example, those strength training sessions, or that metabolite accumulation that is part of the fatigue that we create in the muscle tissue would be a stimulus for the hypertrophy. And last but not least, he proposes that muscle damage, according to Brasov in 2010, that could create that stimulus for hypertrophy. What do we need? What do we know today? The most important thing is that mechanical tension, those strengths that we create in our muscle fibers. This is what's going to stimulate our body the most in order to add these the proteins, this increase of protein synthesis, and besides, the role of metabolic stress is still started in the muscle hypertrophy, that metabolite accumulation and how can it help us gain muscle mass. So we have different ways, the increase that this metabolic stress creates on the recruiting of motor units and muscle fibers. And on the other hand, this high hormonal response, the biokinase production, the oxygen production, or the muscle swelling. What we see from here is that metabolic stress is not that determining. And it's true that although with the same level of mechanical tension, this force that we accumulate in our muscle fibers, it's necessary to have a little bit of peripheral fatigue. Through this fatigue that we're generating, more fatigue does not create a high hypertrophy. And the metabolic stress was a key. We would gain more muscular mass, training with high repetitions, with low weights, or with short breaks between series. The truth is that what the evidence tells us is that mechanical tension is the most important thing, and if the metabolic stress produces an extra amount in the muscle hypertrophy, that extra seems to happen because of an increase of the recruiting that we were saying of motor units and muscle fibers. Why does this happen? In our muscle, when we are training, these metabolites accumulate, if the first instance send a signal to our nervous system, and the nervous system takes the signal of the muscle that is starting to be tired and need to send more neural drive, more output in order to recruit more motor units and to create more tension in my muscle fibers, because otherwise muscle fatigue will make me not to perform as I would like to. And that makes that this activation of muscle fibers is increased. But careful, because when we go too far in metabolic stress, or that peripheral stress is because of a muscle damage, this happens the other way around. The nervous system tends to protect the muscle because it has gone through a specific threshold and it's perceived, between inverted commas, as dangerous. Although this is a hypothesis that is followed, that is not accepted yet, but what we can see is that when we reach a specific level of fatigue, this nervous system is the one that can reduce this output that sends to the muscle fibers to contract. So what we're seeing is that the mechanical tension, those forces that we create in our muscle fibers, are the main mechanism for hypertrophy. Same happens with the muscles, with the muscle damage. if he creates hypertrophy or if it's a main mechanism for hypertrophy. We see that sometimes it happens the other way around. When there's a high level of muscle damage, what happens is that muscle hypertrophy reduces. And it's not that the protein synthesis reduces. The point is that the degradation is too high and the protein synthesis is to repair rather than to grow, to repair that muscle damage that we've created. So once summarized these two mechanisms, I'd like to speak about a mechanism that many perhaps forgot, and that's the neural stimulus. There's a very smart study that was performed, as you can see here on the screen, and they combined the muscle excitation with the electric impulse, the chemical blocking of muscle contraction and mechanical strain when stretching the muscle. Why? Because it is very difficult to separate mechanical strain from neural stimulus, because if there's a high potential, we have more mechanical strain on the fiber. So how do we know that this stimulus comes through the mechanical strain and not through the neural stimulus? That we say that it increases the calcium level and it has different pathways. So these researchers saw that strain and nervous stimulus needed to go hand in hand in order to increase the protein's synthesis, and that's very interesting because it's not mechanical tension or the forces that are generated on a separated way, the ones that make us gain these muscular mass. Together with the neural stimulus, that mechanical strain has to be caused because of the arrival of action potential that will depolarize the membrane of the muscle, as we'll see in a minute, to create that strength. This is not surprising because in the 60s we already know that, well, studies with animals, etc., that when you cut the axon, or the axons of the motion neurons that were innerving type 2 fibers, and you combine them with fibers type 1, and you do the same, but the other way around, that quick fiber become into slow fiber and the other way around. So our muscle fibers adapt, changing their type based on the motion neuron that nerves them. If it has a higher threshold, and the kind of recruiting on this muscle fiber is more similar to a high threshold neuron, although they were type 1, they will become into type 2. So this is why it's not surprising that muscle fiber adapts at hypertrophy level to what the nervous system requires it to do. So we published a review together with Sandro Del Vecchio, Eneco Batbaye, Jordan Santos Consejero, and Carlos Bacharo Fernandez. It was published in the European Journal of Physiology a couple of years ago, and we saw that maybe the best way to quantify the stimulus for hypertrophy was to quantify that neural stimulus that we have. And the truth is that we have a way to measure it, and this is the high-density electromyography. When we speak about that, sometimes we think on the surface bipolar one. Problem is that this is very useful for many things, but it won't give us this information because it gives us very raw information of the electrical activity of the muscle, very general activity, and we don't know what happens in every motor unit. Now you will think, okay, so I'm going to use needle electromyography to know what happens in the motor units, but the point is that you're going to pick just a few motor units, and besides you will be unable to poke the needle exactly the same place to get exactly the same motor units, and you won't know how we can measure what happens in every, in almost every fiber of a muscle with that high-density electromyography that will cover the whole surface of a muscle based on an analysis that it makes on a recruiting pattern. We are able to see in a longitudinal way, for example, a 12-week study, we can measure the changes that we've seen in the motor units, and we can identify them from week 1 to 12. Besides, with this high-density electromyography, it has been proven that it is so accurate that measuring the neural stimulus that our muscle fibers receive and taking into account the thickness of the muscle as being measured, it is able to know in a totally accurate way the direction and the magnitude of the forces that have been created. So this neural stimulus would be the final neural code of the human movement. So if we measure what happens in the motor neurons with high density EMG, we'll know what's going to happen in the muscle. So what happens when we train? Why does all make sense? We know that the nervous system coordinates, plans, executes the human movement based on the motor units recruiting. And these inputs that the motor neurons receive that we have in our marrow bone, in order to create, they are going to activate the muscle fibers that they are innervating. So we know that this is the structure. will have the action potential to the different fibers, and as we all know, without calcium release, the muscle contraction will happen, and we'll have that strain, these forces. But in order for this to happen, many structures, not only in muscle and tendons, but also neural structures play a role. And any change in these structures could create a change in the generated forces, that is, in the stimulus that we create with the training session and in performance. Out of this review that I've talked a minute ago, we can see a picture where we see that if we have an optimized neural drive, as for example, if we're going to a training session in optimal conditions, having slept well, good recovery conditions, etc., what we will do will be to be at top performance and to stimulate our muscle fibers in an optimum way. However, if because of different reasons, fatigue or whatever, lack of recovery, etc., many other aspects that we'll see in a minute, I don't want to self-sabotage the talk. If the neural drive is not optimized, we'll have a worse stimulus. So what is the fatigue? It's just a reduction in our capacity of generating induced strength by exercise in this case. Why? Because of many factors, but mainly we include them into peripheral fatigue and central fatigue. We could say that the peripheral one is the one that happens in the muscle besides the neuromuscle union, but the central fatigue is the one that happens in the nervous system before this neuromuscular union. With our strength production and our capacity of producing strength is reduced because in front of the arrival of action potentials, our muscle fibers are unable to create the same strength that we were generating because of that accumulation of metabolites, this muscular damage, etc. It is said that it is peripheral fatigue because the reason is the muscle. This is why we're generating this fatigue. I mean, we don't have capacity to create that strength. But when the nervous system is the one that is enabled to recruit these motor units in an optimal way, it's considered as central fatigue. The reality is that they are very close together and they can't separate as such. The metabolite accumulation or the muscular damage that would be part of this peripheral fatigue, because they are happening in the muscle, possibly affect the nervous system and they affect their behavior and they will create central fatigue. So in this sense, as a summary, the peripheral fatigue, as I was saying, can happen in this production of the muscle capacity of creating strength because of many reasons. For example, a reduction in the tension receptors that are in touch with the sarcoplasmatic reticulus, a reduction of sensitiveness of the sarcomer proteins to calcium, a reduction in the conduction speed of nerve pulses through different tubes. I mean, there are many reasons why this reduction of creating strength could happen. That has been caused, it has been caused in the muscle. In the same way, there are many origins of this central fatigue. This fatigue that happens because of more neural reasons. And it's true that although the supraespinal areas are paramount, from here upwards, like the brain, encephalic trunk, etc. When we're going to analyze fatigue, what is more important for us at central level is what happens in motor units, because everything goes to the motor neurons, and they are the ones that recruit and activate their muscle fibers. But the point is what's happening in the motor neurons, because if in the crust we can reorganize things, of magnetic current between different cortexes in order to offset that fatigue. As far as it doesn't get to the motor neurons, the performance won't reduce. So when Gandavia, for example, in 2001, if I'm not mistaken, analyzed a little bit this central fatigue, everything was focused on how this affects the alpha motor neurons in the last instance. And these are the afferent fibers 3 and 4. I was telling you before that when we've accumulated a lot of metabolites in the muscle, our nervous system knows that this is happening. And in first instance, it increases this recruiting of motor units and muscle fibers in order to offset this fatigue that we can find in the muscle and to send more nerve pulses in order to have more power. So just to give it a very easy example, if you're getting lost, imagine that, for example, I'm working as a waiter and I'm paid 15 euros an hour, I'm tired, but suddenly I want to go home and they say, sorry, wait, I'll pay 30 euros an hour. So maybe I cheer myself up. So this is what the nervous system does with the muscle. So from here on, it's true that when these metabolite accumulation goes too far, it goes through different thresholds, you have this muscular damage that we were talking about, these 3 and 4 afferents will be the ones that will reduce this neural output towards the muscle fibers, and they will create fatigue. It is very important because these fibers 3 and 4 correspond to this muscular damage, and they correspond to this strain that is created in muscle fibers. So we can see that when there's fatigue, normally vast majority of the central fatigue that we can find in the studies that are being published is because of this relationship between the peripheral fatigue in the muscle fatigue and the central one, because of these afferents 3 and 4. So what are the reasons that could affect this fatigue? What will make the nervous system not be able to recruit our motor neurons at maximum level? It will create more peripheral fatigue. So both fatigues go hand in hand. So what's going to happen? If we take a short break between series, we will accumulate more metabolites, but we'll have more fatigue in the nervous system. If we use, for example, the bloodstream occlusion, it could be very interesting, for example, with the injuries, etc., it will create more fatigue. In the use of, careful, not heavy loads. In the power lift, many times it used to be said, no, the very high loads fry your nervous system. So the low loads with many repetitions have the same effect, because that task goes hand in hand with this central fatigue. So do men and women fatigue the same? No. Women fatigue less. This could be because of many reasons, the different type of fibers, the more use of fat in terms of glycogen, etc. But that's a reality. They have less fatigue and they recover before. It's important to take this into account. Besides, fatigue both in the nervous system and in the muscle can last for a few days. It can even last 7 days in case we have a great muscle damage. And when do we create this muscle damage? When we generate high levels of tension in stretchings and we include exercises that we had not been using. So they are new for us, and besides, the muscle has to create a lot of strength when it is stretched, so fatigue would last longer. So from here on, as I was saying, this muscle damage will intervene in how the motor units behave. It will make this fatigue, both muscle fatigue and peripheral fatigue and neural fatigue, to recover with more time. So any parameter that we can have to alter the behavior of our nervous system could have a positive or negative impact on our behavior, on our performance. Or, for example, listening to music that we like, that's important, by the way, because it has been discovered that if it's music that we don't like, it will even reduce our performance. But if it's music that motivates us, it will improve our performance and our sprinting capacity, jumping capacity. I mean, there are many interesting researches about it. From here on, something that will go a little bit against it would be mental fatigue. And mental fatigue affects physical fatigue. When you get out of work, you have been studying for hours or driving for hours, or maybe you've been using social media, you could be mentally fatigued. If this cognitive task is highly demanding, you're driving, studying, etc., social media could be that too. And that mental fatigue, that psychobiological state that we feel after a demanding cognitive task, and we feel a lack of energy, maybe we are a little bit blurry. So this mix between lack of energy and fatigue is what we could call the mental fatigue. So as we see, this is important. The subjective status of mental fatigue perception is one of the most important indicators, even more than the brain activity researches, to determine whether there's mental fatigue or not. And because this mental fatigue could be created because of the increase of different substances at brain level, and it could reduce the dopamine level. That increases that effort perception, and it could reduce the motivation because of the task. So on this research, we prove that the performance training, for example, with low repetitions, could be jeopardized by mental fatigue. On the other hand, we see that the strength production could be affected, and the strength production is affected when we are training. We have less strength production and a lower speed. Although it's true that when we cause this mental fatigue with a lab task compared to the social media with the cell phone, that lab task creates more mental fatigue. And besides, it reduced the training intensity of the session developed. When I was staying in Germany during my PhD, I wanted to see what happened with the motor units. I've told you that everything that happens in the nervous system, well, the most important thing would be the final unit, the motor units. And we measured what happened with mental fatigue in the behavior of motor units, both in terms of inputs that the motor neurons received in their dendrites and the behavior of the muscle fibers in terms of the recruiting threshold, triggering threshold, etc., many destination variables. And there was no effect in this sense, although the performance was reduced during the training session, but this reduction of the physical training was reduced because of the perception decrease in motivation, etc., that although it's unconscious, it makes us reduce the performance, although our motor neurons are perfect to deliver at top level. So this is why I would like to propose to use an endogenic nutritional support. I work for a supplementation company as a manager, and I read a lot about supplementation, biomedical supplementation, etc. And for example, when this performance reduction is because mental fatigue, we should listen to music, and listening to music is quite effective in order to offset the effects of the mental fatigue. And if it's not very late, because otherwise it wouldn't let us sleep, caffeine and go in the opposite direction of adenosine will reduce the levels of mental fatigue and that effect that has on performance, both technically and physically. So if this peripheral fatigue happens, it could be metabolic and our performance would be reduced. We could have citrulline or nitrates, and if it's because of calcium, for example, citrulline nitrates, phenylcapsicin, glucogen, for example, what we have to do is to intake carbohydrates, and it's because of the afferents that we were mentioning. Phenylcapsicin is a very interesting component that we were studying in the lab, and in my case, it has been quite surprising to me. I was quite skeptical, I must say. As regards the training sessions for hypertrophy, we're going to speak a little bit about this external lift set up in order to create that internal stimulus in our body. So let's see how to set up our training session for hypertrophy and some differences based on the target that we have in terms of performance or body composition. So when we choose exercises, what we need to take into account first and foremost would be the anatomy and function. That is, if what we want is an exercise to work on, for example, hamstrings, we will bend our knees or we'll try to maximize their activation. We can work with hip bending, for example, dead weight. This is where we activate this muscle, and we are activating the different receptors. So based on the anatomy, we will choose what we're interested in, but we will see the ratio between stimulus and fatigue when we want to work on strength training and create hypertrophy, but as a means, because what we are looking for is performance. We'll be interested in seeing the movement we want to foster. From here on, if the goal is a different one, imagine what we're doing is, well, we are personal coaches, we're working at a gym, and the goal would be to increase my muscle mass, to increase my body composition, aesthetics, whatever. We're working differently here. So, for example, imagine that we want to maximize the stimulus that we want to give to a chest muscle. So we'll try to maximize the stimulus and to reduce the fatigue that it creates the chosen exercise. So if, for example, a multi-power system could be less fatiguing than, for example, a kettlebell, obviously the multi-power system will be much better than the other one. So from here on, when we are in personal training sessions, this is mainly for your customers. The customer can say, no, I don't like this exercise, not because of damages, because maybe he's not feeling the muscle that he wants to work. So this is very easy strategy. We would reduce the breaks between series, and we should have high level of repetition so that the athlete, the subject, can feel that metabolic stress that are set by these 3 and 4 systems that we've talked about, and it stimulates what we want to work on. but it's true that maybe this exercise is not for him. In that case, we could change it without any kind of problem. The feedback that we get from these delayed onset muscle soreness could create this foundation to make this decision. So regarding these 2 points, we always need to take into account the goal that we have with the exercise, the muscle that perform the movement, the muscle activity. For example, in electromyography studies that are more interesting, they are high density EMG that are starting to be used with dynamic movements, resistance profiles, training levels, emphasis in the specific mesocycle, adherence and taste. I mean, these are things that should be taken into account. And we will apply here what we've been talking before. We'll apply what we've been talking about before. And this is this neural stimulus. There's something very interesting here. When we were seeing the knee flexors before, in this case the hamstrings, if we want to work with these hamstrings, we'll have to bend our knees in order to make emphasis rather than stretching our hip in order to activate them. There's something interesting that should be taken into account. When we compare these 2 exercises, we can see that with the knee bending, we are working more on hamstrings. But in the knee bending, we have many exercises. We can find 1,000 of them. If we stick to those typical machines of knee bending that are called, like, for example, femoral curl, what we can find what we can do is to assess the hip stretch, because we have different kind of machines. Which is the one that stimulates hamstrings the most in terms of muscle activity, in terms of neural drive that is generated with the same relative intensity? The one where we are sitting down. Why? Do you remember what I was telling you about the nervous system? When we are sitting down, the muscle is kept in a more stretched position since the beginning. We create this knee stretching with the muscle a bit more stretched. And this will make that the muscle afferents will create higher neural output, and the muscle activation will be higher. And when we measure it with MRI and with things that are more related to damages and to prevent injuries, what we see is that doing these things sitting down, that stretching creates more muscle hypertrophy. So for you to connect the dots, these concepts are quite important. Well, there's a quick talk, but when I'm in the classroom, I really want to deep dive in all this, because I think that these kind of things, neural things, etc., are skipped many times, and that would be a mistake, because the stimulus management and fatigue management are the foundation of everything. So the training variables, even exercises, are means to create a stimulus at internal level that we want to create, and we need to use the cards that we have in the right way. So on the other hand, when we want to generate muscle hypertrophy as a priority, it's true that it's good to work with different exercises than just one muscle. For example, in this research that you can see here on the left, we see that the biceps will work better when we work with that elbow flexion at different levels. I mean, same exercise, but with a different level of stimulus. Same happens with triceps. But the stretch work, although it creates more fatigue, we are able to adapt to it more or less quickly, and we are able to induce this small, controlled and monitored muscle damage is good in order to prevent lesions and injuries. But for hypertrophy, it works very well, because the stretching work is the one that creates the highest level of hypertrophy, as we've said with the femoral curl. In the bending exercise, knee bending exercise on the machine, we see that any triceps exercise will create more hypertrophy when our shoulder is bent and the triceps is more stretched, and we perform this elbow stretching from that position, rather than if we do with a high pulley or with a French press. It would be before having elbows next to a trunk. So the exercise order is important, especially to gain strength. And the point is that if we have priority for an exercise, for example, you imagine that we are keen on squats, we have to adapt it because in the end we will be able to gain more strength in these exercises. It's important to take this into account because many times people don't take into account the order that we have to follow for their exercise. There is some kind of chopping list or checklist, and once they've done everything, they've worked on it. So that's not the case at all. And even for hypertrophy, with the current scientific evidences, we can't say in an overwhelming way that this is key. For strength, we can say it. But for hypertrophy, Franz Brandstoffel, for example, is an author that, well, is a colleague and a role model that I've worked with, and I've published a few articles. He says, as an expert, that if the training session lasts for more than 60 minutes or 1 hour, it's very relevant for hypertrophy in this case.
And so no matter what your goal is, just go ahead and do it. I don't think I've spoken about this earlier, but local fatigue, especially at high repetition, is real. So if let's say I do a few reps, I do some bicep curls and get fatigued. If later I do squats, my squatting capability is going to be affected, even if the previous exercise had nothing to do in terms of engaged muscle groups. It is a thing. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this for too long, and I don't want to risk running behind schedule, but when it comes to rep range and exhaustion, people thought that the ideal range for muscle hypertrophy would be between 6 and 12 reps. Why? Because that was the only range that engendered hypertrophy as well as resistance. Nowadays we know it's false, however, and it's been demonstrated by multiple studies. But mind you, although we may be capable of generating muscular hypertrophy at that range, not all ranges will be as effective as others. It all depends on how long we stay at the gym, how many reps we do, how long it takes for our body to recover from that session. And a paper published in 2018 showed that when we work at 20% of 1 RM, that is not optimal. That's not an optimal load to gain muscle mass or strength. We know that the higher the load, the higher our 1 RM is, the higher the number of neural engagement we create. If I'm working at 80% of my 1 RM, I'm going to gain more strength measured by 1 RM, maximum number of reps, than I would if I were working at 50%. And the same goes for hypertrophy. At 50% of 1 RM, we will achieve hypertrophy. But if we go down to 40%, and this study looked at actually 20% in this paper from 2018, which is very easy to find, by the way. You have the reference at the bottom left part of the screen. At 40% of 1 RM, no hypertrophy was achieved. So forget about loads below 40% because they are suboptimal. Over 40%, anything you want. You will achieve, obviously, different degrees of hypertrophy, but you will achieve hypertrophy. Now, for a professional, obviously, it would be more interesting to work with repetition ranges and loads that generate less discomfort and less fatigue. Let's say we do a couple of sets, 6 reps, 10 reps, 20 reps. Which set will create more fatigue, more discomfort? 20 reps, of course. And there is no real need to do that. If our goal is to gain strength and muscle mass, we don't need to do that. We don't need to get that close to exhaustion. When it comes to high performance, we have to fine-tune fatigue control mechanisms, because strength training is just a means to an end to improve performance in one's relative sport. So what we really need to do is optimize our rep range. Let's avoid high reps, because they don't make much sense if we want to avoid fatigue. For the average Joe that goes to the gym, we recommend between 5 and 15, 20 reps. But if they don't want to generate a lot of fatigue, it could be recommendable not to exceed 12 reps even. Now, about exhaustion, the closer we get to it, the more we generate a mechanical stimulus as well as peripheral fatigue, etc., in different muscle fibers. After completing at least 75% of our reps, so let's say a set of 10 reps, after 7, 8 reps, that's all the stimulus we needed. We're very close to exhaustion. If we stop there, we're just getting less fatigued. Obviously, a bodybuilder might need to push it a little further than that and reach exhaustion. Obviously, reaching exhaustion generates a lot more fatigue. Not only acute fatigue, also a slower recovery. And that is something that needs to be taken into account, because when it comes to improving performance in sports, it is inevitable to generate a little fatigue, but you should keep it under control for as much as possible. There was a paper I read not too long ago which showed that if you exceed 16 reps, then fatigue just skyrockets. And going back to rep ranges, it may prove convenient to get closer to exhaustion when we're working with light loads, about 30% of our 1RM. Why is that? Because the intensity you generate, the strength you generate due to that mechanical strength, means that we need to get closer to exhaustion because we're using a light load. But if we're working with a higher load, which we said is what we need for muscle hypertrophy, then we don't need to get that close to exhaustion. When you reach exhaustion, it has been shown, you don't reach a higher degree of hypertrophy. Reaching exhaustion could prove advantageous for very advanced practitioners of bodybuilding. At that level, yes, that could yield some extra benefits, but not for other people. We can generate a very similar degree of muscular hypertrophy, saving a lot of fatigue buildup at the same time. Regarding training volume, this systematic review with the meta-analysis, you can see the reference down below. What we can see is that to maximize muscular hypertrophy, the right number of sets you should do every week is between 12 and 20. Select exercises for each muscle group, of course, between 12 and 20 sets per muscle group. Obviously, you start low and then you increase little by little. The frequency at which we train is also an important factor. It may prove useful to better distribute our training sessions throughout the week. We need to bear in mind our athletes' physiological capacity for adaptation and take that into account when we plan out their training sessions throughout the week. If at a training session, for example, we're going to work legs, obviously a bodybuilder will want to maximize adaptation. If a power lifter can tolerate up to 8 to 10 sets per session, that's an arbitrary number I just came up with, obviously we'll need to distribute those across 3 sessions a week. Obviously I'm exaggerating here, but it's just an example. That's what frequency is all about, really. What really matters is the weekly volume we work with on a weekly basis. If the volume is too high, however, then better handling frequency may yield some benefits. But there are even more variables. One of them is cadence, which is important for muscle development, but not as much as the other variables we talked about earlier. So long as repetitions aren't performed, so long as repetitions don't last more than 8 to 10 seconds, we are achieving our goal here. If you look at the literature, you will see, well, right now, let me tell you that Maron Garcia Ramos and I are writing a book about strength training, in fact, and we've been able to observe by reviewing the literature is that execution speed, the concentric phase, is important, especially if we want to improve performance. It needs to be as high as possible. But obviously you have to monitor fatigue. Having said that, what I recommend is perform the reps during the eccentric phase at a controlled speed, and but with a little speed to it. In the eccentric phase, however, as quickly as possible. At a neural level, the perception we get of the muscle stretching is useful, and we can use it to maximize our eccentric potential when we lift the weight again. We can use it to better optimize each and every rep. If we basically go down when we're doing a bench press a little quicker. Density. How much rest do you need between sessions? We used to say in the past that if you wanted to improve adaptation, you had to rest at least 3 minutes between sets. That's true, but not only for strength. Resting at least 3 minutes between sets generates better muscle adaptation in between sets. What you shouldn't do, however, is increase the number of sets you perform at each training session. Furthermore, and this is important, this leads to less fatigue. Let's bear that in mind. Some studies actually suggest that athletes rest freely in between sets, but that's only doable if we've already established the optimal rep range for that athlete. I wouldn't recommend anyway resting more than 3.5 minutes. And then, of course, let's not forget to compare performance between sessions. Now, advanced techniques like drop sets. Some claim that they generate just the same amount of muscle hypertrophy, but while it does, well, drop sets do stimulate hypertrophy, they also create a lot of fatigue. So careful with that. Concurrent training sessions. This is interesting. Combining strength training with cardio, resistance training, can lead to interferences in both. That's what concurrent training is. It's training cardio and strength on the same day or in the same week. If an athlete only trains strength, they will create a certain degree of muscle hypertrophy. But if I'm already training a lot and I also do some resistance training at a high intensity, well, that will interfere with our strength training. And this happens after about 3 months doing concurrent training sessions. Why am I telling you this? Because interference is actually easily controlled. In fact, it's something essential not only for health purposes, but also if we want to maximize performance in sports such as football. So, are these two types of training compatible with one another without either going to the detriment of the other? Well, this study that was published last year, this meta-analysis we conducted, showed that when resistance training is done at low or moderate intensity, there will not be a lot of interference with strength training. If you do, however, if you train high-intensity training sessions, there will be more interference. How can that interference be avoided? Number one, hydration. That's something that should be done at all times. We always have to replenish our water supplies after each training sessions, and our glycogen supplies as well, our energy supplies. And then we need to monitor fatigue and properly recuperate. In strength training and resistance training, we should always work on different muscle groups. If we're training strength and football, for example, we need to make sure that neither interferes with the other. If we can postpone some strength training sessions to the benefit of football training sessions, then by all means. Or maybe you can target a different muscle group on a given day. So we need to be able basically to prioritize properly. Not all athletes are professionals. A lot of them have jobs that they have to go to, mental fatigue as well. There are other factors that should also be taken into account by personal trainers. And if you also factor in hydration, calorie deficits, replenishment, etc., the vast majority of interference that we could possibly get, we are eliminating. So, what we should do, however, if that interference still happens, is reduce either training load. That is all from me. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. If you have any doubts, here's my contact information, my email address, my Instagram account. So if you've got any questions or doubts, please feel free to reach out.
Muy bien, Carlos. Muchas gracias.
Very well, Carlos. Thank you very much for the presentation, for your time. Thank you for being here with us this evening with this very interesting presentation. There are no further questions, so let's go on a quick break and we'll be back soon with our next speaker. Thank you.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid formamos jugadores para que lleguen a primer equipo, sino que también formamos personas.
Uno como estudiante viene aquí para ver, ¿verdad?, cómo uno puede crecer como profesional y es el inicio de ese proceso de crecimiento profesional que la universidad nos está brindando.
Elegí en su momento estudiar aquí por el prestigio que supone el Real Madrid, la marca, y también la Universidad Europea.
Creo que de las mejores opciones que puedo elegir estar en el Real Madrid. Solo la marca Real Madrid ya te abre muchísimas puertas.
Campeones se pueden formar en todos los aspectos de la vida. Lo importante es saber ser un campeón.
Cuando quieres mejorar cada día, no estar satisfecho con lo que hiciste ayer, creo que para mí eso es lo que te hace ganar día a día.
Realmente lo que más se aprende es a establecer nuevos contactos. Eso es imprescindible para los proyectos profesionales.
Pero nuestro espíritu ganador nos caracteriza, y nos caracteriza no porque lo decimos nosotros, sino porque nos reconocen los demás.
Yo creo que la llave para tener éxito es hacer algo que tú puedes hacer con pasión.
El trabajo en equipo se mantenga independientemente del resultado.
Esos valores se adquieren cuando tú ya tienes ese compromiso desde que entras al club, ¿no? Y al final tú vas haciendo una especie de pasar el testigo con los que van viniendo después.
Y tener las herramientas y los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poder liderar una transformación que tiene que darse ya en este tipo de industria.
There's really no other opportunity like this in the world.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid formamos jugadores para que lleguen a primer equipo, sino que también formamos personas.
Uno como estudiante viene aquí para ver, ¿verdad?, cómo uno puede crecer como profesional y es el inicio de ese proceso de crecimiento profesional que la universidad nos está brindando.
Elegí en su momento estudiar aquí por el prestigio que supone el Real Madrid, la marca, y también la Universidad Europea.
Creo que de las mejores opciones que puedo elegir estar en el Real Madrid. Solo la marca Real Madrid ya te abre muchísimas puertas.
Campeones se pueden formar en todos los aspectos de la vida. Lo importante es saber ser un campeón.
Cuando quieres mejorar cada día, no estar satisfecho con lo que hiciste ayer, creo que para mí eso es lo que te hace ganar día a día.
Realmente lo que más se aprende es a establecer nuevos contactos. Eso es imprescindible para los proyectos profesionales.
Pero nuestro espíritu ganador nos caracteriza, y nos caracteriza no porque lo decimos nosotros, sino porque nos reconocen los demás.
Yo creo que la llave para tener éxito es hacer algo que tú puedes hacer con pasión.
El trabajo en equipo se mantenga independientemente del resultado.
Esos valores se adquieren cuando tú ya tienes ese compromiso desde que entras al club, ¿no? Y al final tú vas haciendo una especie de pasar el testigo con los que van viniendo después.
Y tener las herramientas y los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poder liderar una transformación que tiene que darse ya en este tipo de industria.
There's really no other opportunity like this in the world.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid formamos jugadores para que lleguen a primer equipo, sino que también formamos personas.
Uno como estudiante viene aquí para ver, ¿verdad?, cómo uno puede crecer como profesional y es el inicio de ese proceso de crecimiento profesional que la universidad nos está brindando.
Elegí en su momento estudiar aquí por el prestigio que supone el Real Madrid, la marca, y también la Universidad Europea.
Creo que de las mejores opciones que puedo elegir estar en el Real Madrid. Solo la marca Real Madrid ya te abre muchísimas puertas.
Campeones se pueden formar en todos los aspectos de la vida. Lo importante es saber ser un campeón.
Cuando quieres mejorar cada día, no estar satisfecho con lo que hiciste ayer, creo que para mí eso es lo que te hace ganar día a día.
Realmente lo que más se aprende es a establecer nuevos contactos. Eso es imprescindible para los proyectos profesionales.
Pero nuestro espíritu ganador nos caracteriza, y nos caracteriza no porque lo decimos nosotros, sino porque nos reconocen los demás.
Yo creo que la llave para tener éxito es hacer algo que tú puedas hacer con pasión.
El trabajo en equipo se mantenga independientemente del resultado.
Esos valores se adquieren cuando tú ya tienes ese compromiso desde que entras al club, ¿no? Y al final tú vas haciendo una especie de pasar el testigo con los que van viniendo después.
Y tener las herramientas y los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poder liderar una transformación que tiene que darse ya en este tipo de industria.
There's really no other opportunity like this in the world.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid formamos jugadores para que lleguen a primer equipo, sino que también formamos personas.
Uno como estudiante viene aquí para ver, ¿verdad?, cómo uno puede crecer como profesional, y es el inicio de ese proceso de crecimiento profesional que la universidad nos está brindando.
Elegí en su momento estudié aquí por el prestigio que supone el Real Madrid, la marca, y también la Universidad Europea.
Creo que de las mejores opciones que puedo elegir estar en el Real Madrid. Solo la marca Real Madrid ya te abre muchísimas puertas.
Campeones se pueden formar en todos los aspectos de la vida. Lo importante es saber ser un campeón.
Cuando quieres mejorar cada día, no estar satisfecho con lo que hiciste ayer, creo que para mí eso es lo que te hace ganar día a día.
Realmente lo que más se aprende es a establecer nuevos contactos. Eso es imprescindible para los proyectos profesionales.
Pero nuestro espíritu ganador nos caracteriza, y nos caracteriza no porque lo decimos nosotros, sino porque nos reconocen los demás.
Yo creo que la llave para tener éxito es hacer algo que tú puedas hacer con pasión.
El trabajo en equipo se mantenga independientemente del resultado.
Esos valores se adquieren cuando tú ya tienes ese compromiso desde que entras al club, ¿no? Y al final tú vas haciendo una especie de pasar el testigo con los que van viniendo después.
Y tener las herramientas y los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poder liderar una transformación que tiene que darse ya en este tipo de industria.
There's really no other opportunity like this in the world.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid formamos jugadores para que lleguen a primer equipo, sino que también formamos personas.
Uno como estudiante viene aquí para ver, ¿verdad?, cómo uno puede crecer como profesional, y es el inicio de ese proceso de crecimiento profesional que la universidad nos está brindando.
Elegí en su momento estudié aquí por el prestigio que supone el Real Madrid, la marca, y también la Universidad Europea.
Creo que de las mejores opciones que puedo elegir estar en el Real Madrid. Solo la marca Real Madrid ya te abre muchísimas puertas.
Campeones se pueden formar en todos los aspectos de la vida. Lo importante es saber ser un campeón.
Cuando quieres mejorar cada día, no estar satisfecho con lo que hiciste ayer, creo que para mí eso es lo que te hace ganar día a día.
Realmente lo que más se aprende es a establecer nuevos contactos. Eso es imprescindible para los proyectos profesionales.
Pero nuestro espíritu ganador nos caracteriza, y nos caracteriza no porque lo decimos nosotros, sino porque nos reconocen los demás.
Yo creo que la llave para tener éxito es hacer algo que tú puedas hacer con pasión.
El trabajo en equipo se mantenga independientemente del resultado.
Esos valores se adquieren cuando tú ya tienes ese compromiso desde que entras al club, ¿no? Y al final tú vas haciendo una especie de pasar el testigo con los que van viniendo después.
Y tener las herramientas y los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poder liderar una transformación que tiene que darse ya en este tipo de industria.
There's really no other opportunity like this in the world.
What feeds effort? What feeds motivation? What feeds victory? With the most advanced scientific research, with the quality of the best ingredients, protecting people's health without banned substances and with transparency. Crown Sport Nutrition, your personal best brand.
Bueno, vamos con el siguiente ponente de la tarde. Seguimos todavía un poco la dinámica de
Welcome back. Let's continue this evening of talks with experts in the physiology of exercise. I'd like to give the floor now to our next speaker, Dr. Daniel Buyosa Alvarez. He's an expert in the physiology of exercise and sports training. He's a researcher at the Ramon y Cajal University in León, Spain, and his talk will be about less effort and more benefits with short sprint interval training. Over to you, Daniel. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for your kind words. I'm currently in Brazil. I've been here for about 2 weeks. So if I happen to suddenly speak Portuguese, please forgive me. I'm on full immersion mode here right now. My talk is called Less Effort and More Benefits with Short Sprint Interval Training. So I'll be giving you a few concepts and definitions, and I'll be talking about the physiology of these concepts. So why doing short sprints in certain contexts, not all, and for what reason? I'm a researcher at the León University. I belong to the AMRED research group as well on health and sports training. Now, the first issue I generally prefer to tackle when it comes to adaptation, training, etc., is that we shouldn't forget that regardless of our level of professionalism as athletes, we have a genome that's about 200, 300,000 years old, and our genome has selected certain genes depending on the requirements of our environment. Now, from a phylogenetic point of view, our species has always needed to move, to spend energy, to expend energy to move about. And in 2013, this study was published, which hypothesized that polarized training might have certain advantages over other types of training, and that could have an evolutionary explanation based on the sort of physical activity our ancestors needed to perform on a daily basis. So we can see here that our ancestors would mostly perform low or moderate intensity activities, crafting, transporting, manipulating, carrying, dancing, walking, running. That is what our ancestors would do as hunter-gatherers for most of the time, and only at very short intervals, but quite regularly on a relatively regular basis. However, high-intensity activities such as sprints, throws and tosses, carrying heavy weights, going up steep hills, joining a hunting expedition, etc., etc. So the vast majority of time, our ancestors would perform low-intensity physical activities and, on occasion, high-intensity physical activities. And as a result of that, if we want our training sessions, our training practices, and our training regime to mirror what our ancestors should do, well, we should do precisely that. A lot of low-intensity activity and some high-intensity activity, especially if we want to fight sedentariness. Now, the 100-meter sprint is a great example here. That's a great way of visualizing what sprinting is all about. There is an initial phase of adaptation, followed by a resistance phase where athletes start to experience fatigue. Obviously, high-level athletes such as Usain Bolt experience no dips in speed, no losses in speed. They do not begin feeling fatigue before the 100-meter mark. But anyway, there is in this activity a high level of metabolic energy that is expended to perform it. That is something you can actually do in other activities as well, rowing, etc. After a certain time, you reach your peak in speed and power. And inevitably, after 10-15 seconds, the power we're able to exert, the speed we have reached, well, they will experience a decline, a dip. Bushheit and Lawson, in this illustrious study, proposed a possible classification table for these type of activities. After a certain point, the anaerobic demands of our bodies start to increase. But there is a top point. That's when our body couldn't possibly consume more oxygen than it is. So any increase in power and speed is at the expense of anaerobic demands. So there is a zone of supermaximal intensity where, according to these authors, we could be talking about a different kind of training. Interval training, according to their nomenclature, or according to Manning, intermittent training. It's where anaerobic activities are more prominent than aerobic activities. So that would encompass repeated sprints, of course, which in our judgment would be wrong. A sprint should be performed once. When you give it your all, you rarely sprint at 40-60% of your top speed, right? You always sprint at 100% of your top speed. And so here, when it comes to sprint, the percentage they gave is about 95%, which entails a different combination of efforts with different durations, from a few seconds to 45, that's a sprint. And that should be followed, if you're doing interval training, by a recovery period. The balance you need to strike between power, time, and recovery should be obviously carefully thought through. If you want to develop metabolic power, you should set it up in a certain way. If you want to improve other aspects, you should set it up differently. Above aerobic levels, anyway, some people always talk about sprint trainings, but that's a different nomenclature. Now, to be fair, I should reference David Bishop, because David Bishop, more than 2 decades ago, attempted to include a new idea, and the science community is traditionally quite conservative. As you know, David Bishop, a couple of decades ago, had to put up a fight with his peers to include a concept that is nowadays widely accepted, in fact, which is the concept of repeated sprint ability. This arose out of the necessity to classify efforts in collective sports, because in team sports, well, it is a collective effort, so not everyone on the team is performing at 100% capacity at the same time. Now, David Bishop has now taken an interest in other types of studies, hypoxia applications, and other manipulation in experimental contexts, ability Olivier Girard, a Frenchman who lives in Australia. But anyway, the concept of repeated sprint ability is all about the capacity to maintain performance during short sprints lasting up to 5-6 seconds, and that depends on one's capacity to maintain an anaerobic capacity during sprints, so that their bodies can keep on burning oxygen. After a decade of research, David Bishop realized that in team sports, ironically, there weren't as many sprinting events, meaning athletes reaching their top speed, 25-30 kilometers an hour, and that as a result of that, in this study published by Taylor and collaborators, amongst which we had Matthew Weston, according to this study, maximum speed sprint can only be identified if we take into account speed, and no more than generally 2, 3, 4 sprints in a row can be performed. When an athlete is training to improve their performance on the pitch, training sprints in football obviously could be useful. Now, this is also very much renowned paper by Osnach and Pietro Enrico Di Prampero, and this said that we should differentiate between top speed reached during a football game and metabolic speed. There's a paradox here. A 2-3 second effort, which is the kind of sprint you would do in football, is all about accelerating at your top metabolic capacity, because you need to expend energy for a very long time to achieve that. But that type of effort is an effort you start expending at low speeds because you're accelerating. But it's the top possible energy expenditure you could have during an acceleration. So you're accelerating, and the same goes, by the way, for decelerations, because they have a lower metabolic demand than accelerations, but they also cause a lot of muscle damage, decelerations. So being able to identify different effort profiles in team sports, well, boils down to the development of GPS technology, radars, etc. So in 2014, we started a collaboration with Professor Alvarez from the Granada University. Together, we talked about the concept of repeated acceleration ability. And during the America Cup, we worked with referees, not with players, and we realized that during a game, they never reached top speed, they never sprinted at top speed, but they accelerated many, many times. They had to. And we were able to identify those instances using both a gyrometer and a GPS. Now, we also have Tabate's protocol, also quite famed, which is something that the Japanese national manager for the artistic skating team came up with. It was an experimental study published in 1996 in the Medicine and Science in Sports and Exercise journal.
And what does this protocol discover? It develops effort at 170%, so super maxim beyond the oxygen consumption threshold. So with efforts of 20 seconds, with very short recoveries of 10 seconds, as opposed to what happens with a moderate training session, where only the aerobic condition is improved. When we have anaerobic supermaximum efforts, besides the maximum oxygen consumption, we would also improve the anaerobic capacity. This is what we can see here on the left, after 6 weeks of training 5 days a week. So a very important topic when speaking about our training sessions, supermaximum training sessions at the very high intensities, close to all in or all out. Besides of developing that aerobic physical condition, we are developing the anaerobic one. And this wouldn't happen with a more classic training session at a moderate intensity. And this is the famous work of Burgomaster Djivala's group that took 30-second springs. It's an anaerobic power protocol. They repeated it from 4 to 6 times with recoveries of 4 minutes. And they verified that after training just 6 sessions, that is a very interesting thing, because up to then, every study was aimed at looking for what happened in 4, 6, 8 weeks. That was the time that was understood as a minimum time to have stable reactions. We could see that after 6 sessions, it was possible to improve the peak power, the oxidative capacity of the muscle, measured as a maximum activity of an enzyme, and the capacity of 80% of the time of maximum oxygen consumption. This consumption was not improved as a paradox. We've seen this with different models of 30-second springs that, well, they're very heavy, as we will see, that produce a great fatigue. And we'll see that after accumulating many evidences, there was a need of differentiating between the classic moderate training session that will produce adaptations at central level with maximum consumption, systolic capacity, capacity of transporting oxygen, and peripheral capacity, oxidative capacity in the muscle because of the higher capillary density, mitochondrial content, and so on. And these classic methods would have similar effects, but with different emphasis, with different intervals, with springs, for example, with supermaximum intensities, where we could differentiate between the hit and seat protocols, where the hit protocols, as the intervals last for 2, 3, or 4 minutes, they will have a higher emphasis in the central capacity, that is to increase the the myocardium capacity, and we would have different capacities at the oxidative capacity of the muscle. And in this sense, please, no panic with this figure that we've taken. Well, it's not ours. We've translated it. When we have very brief sprints at maximum power and maximum speed, we're obviously consuming phosphocreatine as energy. It would be anaerobic to lactic. That would be an important production because of glucolysis. So it's important to remember that this dephosphocreatine synthesis will always need an ATP that will come from the Krebs cycle. When we make short sprints of maximum intensity or supermaximum, all or nothing, all or out, and when we have a recovery time that could be longer or shorter, during that recovery we will stimulate the main aerobic mechanism in the skeletal muscle, and we will stimulate the oxidative capacity because we need to resynthesize ATPs in order to be able to resynthesize phosphocreatine. Okay? So thanks to this mechanism, it's possible to see the paradox that with a very brief top maximum effort and aerobic effort in the recovery, will be stimulating indirectly the aerobic metabolism, mainly the oxidative capacity of the skeletal muscle. And we have this review from 2014, after more or less 10 years generating information with these heat and sit protocols, where we can see that, generally speaking, from 2 weeks to 12 or 15 weeks, we have every kind of adaptation at central and peripheral level, with sessions that could last between 10 minutes and half an hour. Although, well, we could verify here that with such short sessions like 10 or 20 minutes, it was enough. If periodicity was of 3 sessions a week, it was enough to have significant adaptations. And these adaptations, among others, in the case of Wingate sprints, they embraced since the moment of maximum consumption, etc., including adaptations at blood pressure level. Sometimes they are skipped. We would also have more metabolic adaptation of the glycemic indicator as a response, insulin response, or constant blood glucose concentration in the blood after the corresponding fasting. We have adaptation of the endothelial functions, very important for cardiovascular health. So glucose transporters, so more metabolic adaptations, and reductions in adiposity, both central and peripheral, or reduction of arterial rigidity and blood pressure control. So there would be mainly cardiometabolic adaptations that are possible thanks to interval efforts and sprint efforts. Heat 30-second sprints, this is what the evidence said up to then. But in exchange, we can see at the bottom that when we're speaking about shorter sprints of 6 or 8 seconds, the evidences are much fewer. So, well, at least it was by then. So in this context, Arilson, well, today is Dr. Sousa. Well, obviously, we've created both him and other former students. Well, we have a date tomorrow to have dinner. He did this great doctoral thesis with the Chibala model with 30-second sprints. We asked ourselves if, because of an increase of the aerobic condition and the maximum aerobic power, that could come together with an increase of the autonomic control, we could see improvements in the inhibiting control after 6 sessions of sprints, of Wingate sprints sessions. So Delson was able to assess experimental group and control group. He was able to gather more than 100 volunteers that were assessed before and after. both in aerobic and in autonomic control, and the attention capacity. And what can we see here? If we have a look at the top figure, we see that there's an important thing that sometimes is ignored. When we have an external load, 30-second sprint, let's remember that the power peak is after 3 seconds, more or less. It starts to drop after 10 seconds. The point is that there is an increase of the cardiorespiratory response, that it's not the same in every subject. For example, with 4 or 6 sprints maximum of 30 seconds, there are subjects like here on the top left corner that are very close to 90% to the maximum heartbeat, but there are others on the right that don't reach it, and that this criteria was useful to identify the ones that had high loyalty, that had an internal load, a response that was very high, compared to the ones that had lower adherence to this criteria, as we can see on the right top corner. So the point here is that the same respiratory response entailed an improvement of more components in the attention evaluation that improved after 6 sessions of this kind of training session. In the case of the group that had a higher cardiorespiratory response during the training session. So the parasympathetic system improved. It has a lot to do with resilience, with stress capacity, etc. But out of all the autonomous parameters, in the case of high adherence group, they had a high cardiorespiratory response during sprints. So they had improvements. We could verify improvements in these components, specifically in entropy and other complexity parameters of heartbeat that could be combined to more cognitive aspects, not only cardio-autonomic parameters, compared to the group that didn't have such a high cardiorespiratory response during the 30-second sprint training. So after this thesis, or during it, we confirmed what the literature pointed out. This model that Dybala spread for many years with different cohorts for more than 10 years. We knew a little bit of physiology and our own experience. Well, I used to be a runner. We knew that sprints with a great glucolytic and lactic demand, well, they would generate a lot of fatigue and muscle pain, or maybe even dizzy feeling, or to throw up. Sometimes, in fact, some of our subjects threw up. They make us think that these studies are not so acceptable because they could reduce the adherence and the motivation. So the advantage is that with a very small dose of exercise, they have very quick effect. But on the other hand, they are very difficult. They're very tiring. And they can even make people dizzy, or they can make them vomit. So in this context, there was the need of identifying the minimum sprint doses in order to generate cardiometabolic adaptations. We have a classic work from Dybala group and a Gillen group, where they identified that 3 minutes of sprints, of 20-second sprints in 3 days a week, were enough to improve the oxidative capacity of the muscle, thus improving the cardiometabolic health. But the point is, how do we combine the fact that we have a small dose of high-intensity exercise that is not that heavy, is not that tiring for the subject, that does not create vomits, bad feelings, or whatever, and that small dose creates important effects at cardiometabolic level. So we had a series of reports. We start by the classic Hassel one, where they compare 10 seconds with 30-second sprints with 4-minute breaks. I'm going to remove, this bar. With 4-minute breaks or 2-minute breaks, as you can see there in the control group. And we see that it could be as effective to improve the maximum oxygen consumption. So that's a combination of central factors, 75% more or less, of peripheral factors, oxidative capacity, and 25% more or less, well, 25-30%. We see that 10 seconds or 30-second sprints improved. Equally, if we saw the individual response, but the group response was almost, was very similar, with the difference that when we have very short sprints, this is what we could see on the right, the average power is much lower, because the shorter the sprint is, less acidosis we would be creating, and less muscle peripheral fatigue we would be producing. So we have something here, and this is that shorter sprints, 10-second sprints, can have the same positive effects of increasing the maximum oxygen consumption level, but with a lower fatigue and a lower drop in mechanical power during training sessions. This way, after a few studies, Pollard and Melcav in 2017 published a proposal of modified sprints training, in the sense that if we assess different actors, they could suggest that with the initial proposal of between 4 and 6 sprints of 30 seconds each, as we can see there, you can see that on the left, they propose that such small doses like 20-second sprints could have the same benefit from a cardiometabolic point of view. We could be speaking of moving from 90 to 30 minutes a week with a much lower perception, because when we have 30-second sprints, we have a maximum feeling that the training session is being very hard, but with less sprints and shorter, that perception is much lower, so we can tolerate that sprint much better. That was a very interesting proposal that democratizes in some way the sprints training, because it is more accessible and it is not that hard. And in this context, here's where we find the anecdote that just by then, Stefano Benitez is currently has a PhD in physical education, and he teaches in the Republic of Uruguay. He asked me to be his thesis manager, and we were speaking about that, and we were speaking about Addison then, and we had the need of having a proposal of much shorter sprints, because we knew, because of the physiology, that very short sprints could improve the aerobic condition. For example, it's known that a team sport athlete has quite good oxygen consumption levels beyond 60 milliliters per gram a minute. It's clear evidence that that if we repeat short efforts many times, improves the aerobic condition. That's on the one hand, and on the other hand, the need of avoiding that pain and suffering, that dizzy feeling of 30-second sprints. So in this context, we were thinking about doing that in Stefano's thesis, and the people from Canada came first. This Islam group, where they compared 5, 15, and 20-second sprints with 40, 120, and 240 seconds. What we can see here is that the cardiorespiratory demand of the very short sprints is not by peaks, as happens with 15 and 30-second sprints. When we have shorter sprints with a shorter recovery, we are favoring an almost 90% of recovery in a well-trained person of phosphocreatine that allows this person to keep the mechanical and anaerobic power, the sprint speed, with a cardiorespiratory demand that is high. And here we see, in the case of peak speed, we see that the 5 seconds protocol can be kept, or there's a very small loss of 4.2% of the peak speed during sprints, but when we have longer sprints with an important glucolytic component, there are important losses in terms of speed, between 14 and 27%. So here we see that short sprints, 5-second sprints, could mean a moderate cardiorespiratory demand that allow them to keep the mechanical power or the speed in this case. So, in this case, the effect in feeling scale, the effective response is much better with short sprints, and the experience of pleasure is better than with longer sprints. So as a whole, we have a moderate cardiorespiratory response with the possibility of keeping the sprint power, and with an effective response, a psychological response, that is much better. In this context, first study, well, the Canadians came first, but what we did was to compare two protocols in terms that were equal in terms of sprint time, with 16 5-second sprints compared to 4 20-second sprints. So the time between protocols was the same, with recoveries that were, of course, sub-maximum recoveries between efforts. And we verified, according to cardiometabolic responses, jumping capacity to see how it affected the muscle fatigue. And we saw the psychological responses. And what do we see here? When we make 5-second sprints, although the maximum sprint time is the same between parameters, surprise, we see that this short sprint exercise is much more aerobic and with a lower lactate production. We have a protocol that with very short sprints has a paradox that is more aerobic and less glucolytical. And we see here that we are able to keep the mechanic strain with a lower loss of it, with a lower fatigue index, and as you can see at the bottom, although it was significant, we have a lower perceptive response. So in this experiment, that is quite pertinent because as opposed to other studies, here we are equaling the total sprint time. So having 16 5-second sprints resulted in a more aerobic and less glucolytical protocol with more and with better psychological responses that were more positive. So with the same time of sprint, shorter efforts was much more efficient, keeping in mind that this protocol lasted around 12 minutes. And here, you see that the heartbeat recovery was faster after finishing the training session with a higher parasympathetic activity. We were able to keep the CMJ activity. And there was a fatigue, a muscle fatigue, peripheral fatigue, maybe a low-frequency fatigue. And this made the chronicle study. We developed a strength protocol with short efforts and a concurrent training session. Half the training session was short sprints and half of it were squats that didn't last for more than 5 seconds. Okay, we assessed the body composition, jump, a vertical jump, incremental test variability, and redox state. that is behind the physiopathology of many metabolic diseases, before and after. There was a nutritional control too, and physical activity control with accelerometers. That's not frequent, but it makes us differentiate the exercise effect from what's happening outside. Sometimes this is not under control and there could be changes. Here we see that there were improvements in the power capacity, in the jumping capacity, but interestingly, the concurrent training session created the same improvements than the strength training. So there's lower interference when this strength training session with intervals of less than 5 seconds will create less interference than if they were physiculturist series. And for us, the most important result was that this oxidative stress, with just 6 sessions of 10 or 12 minutes, improved the redox status. It improved the different markers that we have here in subjects that were physically active, healthy, and with oxygen consumption beyond 50 milliliters per kilogram a minute. But the sprints in the concurrent group improved importantly and very similarly the maximum oxygen consumption. There's an important protocol here. And with short efforts, 5-second efforts, both in super maximum sprints and in strength effort, we were able to improve the aerobic condition, the anaerobic condition, and the redox situation. So this suggests, this is why we're using it with hypertense people. This protocol could help us improve the situation with different clinical conditions. So after this, a brief stay at the University of Germany, we decided to review the literature of every short sprint protocol that were defined as a 10 seconds one. Why 10 seconds? Because 10 seconds, in 10 seconds we can see a predominance of phosphocreatine from anaerobic to lactic. In 10 seconds, have an expression of the maximum power during these 10 seconds. Normally, important drops of the power and speed happen after 10 seconds. So that was the criteria of why we were going to assess systematically protocols with meta-analysis that also included rowing, boxing, and other activities, cyclical activities, repeated, where we could verify that at this first figure, the maximum oxygen consumption could be improved with very short sprints protocols, or shorts, 10 seconds or less, as happens with heat, classic, or continuous training protocols. Besides, at the top figure, we can see that the aerobic improvement could also improve very similarly with short efforts of 10 seconds or less compared to the heat, classic sit, or constant training, and the anaerobic performance could improve too. So different tests, same thing, calling the attention of the fact that it was not only with by running, but also with, for example, box efforts like rowing or punching. In other motricity, these efforts would be very interesting to improve both in performance and the aerobic and anaerobic power capacities. Okay? Here we see a systematic review, that is, a subsequent review, that confirms that when we have 5 or 6 second sprints, the effective response is much more positive, and compared to when we make 15 to 20 or 30 seconds sprints. So that's a very important argument, because the effective response has a lot to do with the adherence to the exercise. If we want to favor this adherence from the psychological response point of view of the high intensity exercise, these efforts of 5 or 10 seconds are much better, because the effective response is much more positive compared to efforts that take longer. And in this context, this made us see the effect, because we knew, according to the literature, that depression, that is a pandemic that we have right now in the world, especially after the COVID situation, we think, there's an evidence that it improves the aerobic power and the body composition, but specifically the aerobic power has to do with the depression symptoms improvement, maybe this sprint protocol that has an effective response that is quite positive, and that's very important in a mood disease like decade of depression. We could find a very good protocol for aerobic and anaerobic conditions, and also to improve the situation of women that were diagnosed with depression. This was a study at the University Hospital of Campo Grande with women that were taking this 5-second sprint training sessions in the lab. So first of all, we had a psychiatric evaluation of an evaluation of the body composition. We saw the different physical condition parameters like jumping, manual pressure, the hand grip pressure, and the aerobic capacity in the incremental test. They all got familiar with that, and that was subsequently assessed after several weeks, where there was an experimental group with a short sprint group and a control group that continued with the medication and just indications to have a normal life. The sprint protocol was adapted from the previous protocols that we've presented in our group, and we started just with 3 or 4 sprints at the first session. They were increasing linearly in a progressive schedule. In order to reach the maximum level of 10 or 12 sprints, we allowed the patient to decide the number of sprints per session in this range. And the last session, the 6th session, that was a tapering, a reduction in number of sprints.
2-minute work, 2-minute rest at low cadence for recovery in between sprints. This is the most important results. Depression symptoms as evaluated by a psychiatrist improved greatly in patients who trained in such a way, and there were also improvements in terms of abdomen diameter and a generalized, although minimal, improvement in jumping capabilities. So they got better at sprinting and they got better at jumping. They even developed more aerobic power, and we were also able to ascertain that because patients 3 days a week and over the weekends kept track of the number of steps they took, they got increasingly motivated, and they registered important improvements in terms of body composition as well, because more oxidation, and as a result of that, there was an improvement, an increase in spontaneous physical activity. And this is all the result of these very short sprints, because somehow they were energizing for these patients. And now to conclude, this was in a controlled environment, i.e. a laboratory, but the same sort of reasoning is valid for playing activities, for recreational football. Recreational football training produces more pronounced broad-spectrum adaptations than training programs solely focusing on continuous jogging, interval running, or strength training. Why do these people improve? Because they do have to make an effort, of course. They do have to sweat it out, but only for short periods of time, very short periods of time. This was done in Portugal. So to conclude, take-home message. Short sprints, 10 seconds or less, are great to further develop aerobic and anaerobic qualities, thus improving performance and health. The greater emphasis on strength or capacity is going to depend on the density of training sessions and how long they last, and super maximum sprints, if very short, between 4 and 6 seconds, lead to less metabolic fatigue and a higher effective response.
Recordando que los sprints supramáximos muy breves, de 4 a 6 segundos, favorecen una menor fatiga metabólica, obviamente, un menos activación mucolítica, y por lo
Because
tanto,
there is a lower mucolytic activation, and generally speaking, this is a virtuous circle because these people then feel encouraged to train more. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. If you want, feel free to reach out to me on social media. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Daniel.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for your talk. It's been great having you here. Thank you for sharing all that information with us. We'll now go on a short break and then we'll move on to the final speech of the day. Thank you.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid formamos jugadores para que lleguen a primer equipo, sino que también formamos personas.
Uno como estudiante viene aquí para ver, ¿verdad?, cómo uno puede crecer como profesional y es el inicio de ese proceso de crecimiento profesional que la universidad nos está brindando.
Elegí en su momento estudiar aquí por el prestigio que supone el Real Madrid, la marca, y también la Universidad Europea.
Creo que de las mejores opciones que puedo elegir estar en el Real Madrid, solo la marca Real Madrid ya te abre muchísimas puertas.
Campeones se pueden formar en todos los aspectos de la vida. Lo importante es saber ser un campeón.
Cuando quieres mejorar cada día, no estar satisfecho con lo que hiciste ayer, creo que para mí eso es lo que te hace ganar día a día.
Realmente lo que más se aprende es a establecer nuevos contactos. Eso es imprescindible para los proyectos profesionales.
Pero nuestro espíritu ganador nos caracteriza, y nos caracteriza no porque lo decimos nosotros, sino porque nos reconocen los demás.
Yo creo que la llave para tener éxito es hacer algo que tú puedas hacer con pasión.
El trabajo en equipo se mantenga independientemente del resultado.
Esos valores se adquieren cuando tú ya tienes ese compromiso desde que entras al club, ¿no? Y al final tú vas haciendo una especie de pasar el testigo con los que van viniendo después.
Y tener las herramientas y los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poder liderar una transformación que tiene que darse ya en este tipo de industria.
There's really no other opportunity like this in the world.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid formamos jugadores para que lleguen a primer equipo, sino que también formamos personas.
Uno como estudiante viene aquí para ver, ¿verdad?, cómo uno puede crecer como profesional y es el inicio de ese proceso de crecimiento profesional que la universidad nos está brindando.
Elegí en su momento estudiar aquí por el prestigio que supone el Real Madrid, la marca, y también la Universidad Europea.
Creo que de las mejores opciones que puedo elegir estar en el Real Madrid, solo la marca Real Madrid ya te abre muchísimas puertas.
Campeones se pueden formar en todos los aspectos de la vida. Lo importante es saber ser un campeón.
Cuando quieres mejorar cada día, no estar satisfecho con lo que hiciste ayer, creo que para mí eso es lo que te hace ganar día a día.
Realmente lo que más se aprende es a establecer nuevos contactos. Eso es imprescindible para los proyectos profesionales.
Pero nuestro espíritu ganador nos caracteriza, y nos caracteriza no porque lo decimos nosotros, sino porque nos reconocen los demás.
Yo creo que la llave para tener éxito es hacer algo que tú puedas hacer con pasión.
El trabajo en equipo se mantenga independientemente del resultado.
Esos valores se adquieren cuando tú ya tienes ese compromiso desde que entras al club, ¿no? Y al final tú vas haciendo una especie de pasar el testigo con los que van viniendo después.
Y tener las herramientas y los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poder liderar una transformación que tiene que darse ya en este tipo de industria.
There's really no other opportunity like this in the world.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid formamos jugadores para que lleguen a primer equipo, sino que también formamos personas.
Uno como estudiante viene aquí para ver, ¿verdad?, cómo uno puede crecer como profesional y es el inicio de ese proceso de crecimiento profesional que la universidad nos está brindando.
Elegí en su momento estudiar aquí por el prestigio que supone el Real Madrid, la marca, y también la Universidad Europea.
Creo que de las mejores opciones que puedo elegir estar en el Real Madrid, solo la marca Real Madrid ya te abre muchísimas puertas.
Campeones se pueden formar en todos los aspectos de la vida. Lo importante es saber ser un campeón.
Cuando quieres mejorar cada día, no estar satisfecho con lo que hiciste ayer, creo que para mí eso es lo que te hace ganar día a día.
Realmente lo que más se aprende es a establecer nuevos contactos. Eso es imprescindible para los proyectos profesionales.
Pero nuestro espíritu ganador nos caracteriza, y nos caracteriza no porque lo decimos nosotros, sino porque nos reconocen los demás.
Yo creo que la llave para tener éxito es hacer algo que lo pueda hacer con pasión.
El trabajo en equipo se mantenga independientemente del resultado.
Esos valores se adquieren cuando tú ya tienes ese compromiso desde que entras al club, ¿no? Y al final tú vas haciendo una especie de pasar el testigo con los que van viniendo después.
Y tener las herramientas y los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poder liderar una transformación que tiene que darse ya en este tipo de industria.
There's really no other opportunity like this in the world.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid formamos jugadores para que lleguen a primer equipo, sino que también formamos personas.
Uno como estudiante viene aquí para ver, ¿verdad?, cómo uno puede crecer como profesional y es el inicio de ese proceso de crecimiento profesional que la universidad nos está brindando.
Elegí en su momento estudiar aquí por el prestigio que supone el Real Madrid, la marca, y también la Universidad Europea.
Creo que de las mejores opciones que puedo elegir estar en el Real Madrid, solo la marca Real Madrid ya te abre muchísimas puertas.
Campeones se pueden formar en todos los aspectos de la vida. Lo importante es saber ser un campeón.
Cuando quieres mejorar cada día, no estar satisfecho con lo que hiciste ayer, creo que para mí eso es lo que te hace ganar día a día.
Realmente lo que más se aprende es a establecer nuevos contactos. Eso es imprescindible para los proyectos profesionales.
Pero nuestro espíritu ganador nos caracteriza, y nos caracteriza no porque lo decimos nosotros, sino porque nos reconocen los demás.
Yo creo que la llave para tener éxito es hacer algo que lo pueda hacer con pasión.
El trabajo en equipo se mantenga independientemente del resultado.
Esos valores se adquieren cuando tú ya tienes ese compromiso desde que entras al club, ¿no? Y al final tú vas haciendo una especie de pasar el testigo con los que van viniendo después.
Y tener las herramientas y los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poder liderar una transformación que tiene que darse ya en este tipo de industria.
There's really no other opportunity like this in the world.
Muy bien, vamos con la última ponencia de la tarde.
Okay. Last presentation for today's event, a special one actually. This is Jesus. He's a professor of our roster. He was actually giving classes not too long ago, and today he's here to talk to us about communication, motivation, and persuasion for training and nutrition. Science-based solutions. Jesus has a privileged point of view because aside from being a professor at our masters, he's also a researcher in sports sciences and is currently in charge of physical preparation for the Egyptian international handball team. Jesus, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. Over to you. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I have a feeling that this is actually an event I can personally learn a lot from. It is online, sure, but still, I'm getting the feeling that everybody has participated in this very enthusiastically. I'm getting great vibes from all the professionals we've heard from and the participants. I have a very distinct feeling that a lot of value is being created here today. Now, I won't be beating about the bush. I'm here to provide you with practical tools to improve communication, motivation, and persuasion skills in your teams. Whenever we talk amongst ourselves, professionals, we know how important it is. But when it comes to teaching, we tend to neglect it and disregard it a little bit. Communication is a very contradictory skill. The goal of it really is to sway in a way to influence people we work hand in hand with. It's the best possible skill you could have, communication. Most professionals, the vast majority of people actually you talk to, will tell you that one's capacity to secure a new client, to motivate athletes, one's capability of convincing people to kickstart a project with you, one's ability to negotiate when sitting at a table with other coaches and players, the ability to negotiate a contract, to handle conflict, all of that is about being able to connect with others, to persuade others, all in all, to communicate effectively. And then when people are good communicators, if you ask them, how much money, time have you invested in this? How many books have you read? Have you actually studied this? Very often, people will tell you no time at all, no money at all, nothing at all. What does that mean? That on the one hand, we do know that without communication we're nothing, but on the other hand, only a handful of us invest resources in learning how to communicate. I'd like to talk to you about failure now. I was lucky enough, this is me, this is my 1.0 version. I was lucky enough to join a high-profile team when I was very, very young. And still, even after so much experience, so much work, I don't feel like I'm communicating as effectively as I should. I don't think everybody actually believes in me and the product I have to offer as a professional, because I look at the faces of people who listen to me and I just don't see it. I fail. But then, precisely because I've told myself this truth, I've improved. This is Quillo, José Manuel Sierra. We actually work together in the Egyptian international team alongside Juan Carlos Pastor. He's manager of the handball team over in Egypt. And this was incredible happenstance. My first professional handball team was the Ciudad Real. We worked there together and we're working together now. Anyway, when I started working on my communication. I still remember the face that manager pulled when I gave him an answer, when I gave him a response based on what I'd read. Because I'd prepared, I'd read up about communication. I still remember the face he pulled. I remember what the question was and what my answer was. He asked me, Jesus, what are the most important characteristics of your PT model? And I could have given an answer that personal trainers often give, a vague response, an abstract response, probably a long, lengthy response, without really getting to the point. But I knew then and there that that wouldn't have worked out for me, that I needed to give him accurate information, useful and possibly novel information. Obviously, this piece of information could only be novel if the other elements were there as well. And I told him, look, the vast majority of personal trainers that I know and the books I've read, I think, greatly overestimate exercise and methodologies. Exercises and methodologies. And I think there are two things that are far more important when it comes to achieving results. And then at that point, I fell silent for a couple of seconds because I think that silence is an important part of communication. And he looked at me with expectation. I knew I would get that look. It was the face of somebody who wants to hear more because he thinks, as a manager, as a coach, that that information can be useful. This is all based on science, by the way, this communication technique. So he asked me, what's even more important than exercises, than methodologies? What's the foundation of it all? And I told him, key variables in training. A lot of PTs forget about that. And that's the basics. And I know that all of my athletes need to be able to correct themselves when training strength, for example, is going to improve so much faster. So if I'm able to properly handle the reps he's doing compared to the reps he could actually do, there are going to be direct repercussions on the results this athlete will achieve. This is a result, obviously, of good preparation work. I spent a lot of time thinking about how I could complement my training in physiology with communication skills. Anyway, I told him that, and I told him something else. There's even more to this. Another thing that's often underestimated. You want to know what it is? And he said, yes, of course. And I said, the thing that everybody underuses and underestimates is the people you train with, nutritionists, the people you're working with need to believe in you as a professional. And they need to believe in the work you've come up with, in the proposition you've made for them. Almost nobody plans that out in advance, but I do. And when I gave him that response, I actually saw that something changed in our relationship with the manager. He wanted to know more about my methods, and it was the first time I ever got the feeling in my life that in a matter of, 1 minute, the perceived authority of me as a professional had increased from 3 to 5, let's say. It had increased. I emphasized the importance of the basics of training and nutrition in a very simple way, and my relationship with the manager had improved. Now, before I continue, I want to thank those of you who are streaming this event. You are the 3% of those professionals who believe in the importance of communication, a skill that many, many people, let me repeat that, don't believe they should even invest in. We invest in training sessions upon training sessions, and we know loads about training. We know loads about load planning and a gym session, and that's all fine and dandy. But mind you, your athletes are only going to care about that if you can properly communicate the benefits they will create for them. So thank you for paying attention to me. Only 3% of professionals in our field invest in communication, and you're doing it. So congratulations. Thank you. By the way, at the end of this presentation, I'll be giving you a gift. It's something that is closely related with the topic at hand, something that you'll find very useful, but I'll give you that at the end of the presentation, so please stay connected. Okay, question for you. Who'd win a race between these two, a Ferrari or a Vespa? Well, obviously, we'd be normally drawn to think, well, the car. But it's not that. The winning combination is a combination of both vehicle and driver. It's not always the best and finest who win races. Why don't they win races? They may have a Ferrari, yes, but they don't know how to drive it. They will stall it. They will crash. They don't know how to drive it in certain terrains. They have a much more powerful vehicle, but they can't drive it properly. Communication is all about that. Communication is about handling yourself in this jungle that our lives are. You need to make sure that your vehicle and your driver go hand in hand. Knowledge, I would say, is absolutely fundamental, but communication is essential. Because without communication, knowledge is useful. That's why I always like to say that knowledge is relevant if you can't pass it down to other people. Back in the day, people used to say, you're only worth as much as you know, but that's not true. I knew a lot back in the day, but I wasn't good at communicating, and I didn't know that that was my problem. I thought that my professional worth was entirely dependent on the stuff I knew. But that is a false paradigm. In our society, very often, those who know less can be successful because they can sell their product. They can loyalize their clientele. Even if they know 4, they come across as if they knew 6. That's why I often like to quote Alex de la Vega. I actually met him more than once at a couple of trainings. If you know 7, but you communicate 3, professionally you're a 3. And I couldn't agree more with that. And what does it mean to communicate well? Often we think that being able to sell ourselves is the main communication skill we need to work on. But from my point of view, that's not the case. This is something that I realized back in the day, and it changed my perspective on things. That's why I'm telling you now. When you communicate, you need to make sure that you stay loyal and true to yourself. I realized after a number of years working in this profession that maybe I was an averagely effective communicator, but I wasn't communicating as myself, and I realized this at dinners, at work events. When I communicated in public, it was still me, yes, but it was a worse version of me. I wasn't able to communicate certain ideas persuasively, effectively. Bridging that gap between the authentic me and the public me is absolutely incredible and super important. My life goal, and please tell me about similar experiences that you've had, You can drop a comment on YouTube. You can send me an email, write to me on social media. Please, if you feel like you improve, let me know that you have. Let me know. I'm now finally capable of communicating what I feel. This is my life goal. And I'm getting closer and closer to it. If you come away from this with a negative opinion of myself, I will accept it, because it means that I haven't been able to fully show you who I am. It will mean that we haven't connected for whatever reason. And that is the essence of the problem I used to have back in the day. I wish I could take a screenshot of what I'm seeing now. I'd like to see you fill in the blanks here. What this means is knowledge is irrelevant if you can't communicate. Life goal. Communicating what you feel inside of you effectively. Now, oftentimes, coaches I work with, when I say this to them, object. They say, look, I like planning training sessions when it comes to promoting loyalty, conflict handling, all of that. I don't care as much. And when they say that to me, I always respond in the same way. Communication is a key skill that you'll be able to use with your athletes, with your nutritionists, with all of the staff members of your club. Can you really envision a situation where you achieve great results if the person that you're training, that you plan nutrition for, doesn't believe in you and in your ideas? Do you think you could possibly achieve top results if that person doesn't fully place their trust in you and your authority? Ask yourself that question. So that's going to change things for you. And it's actually a question I ask athletes very, very often. If athletes don't believe in physical preparation, physical training, because I get to a point very often where they turn into basically puppets. They just want me to tell them what they have to do and they'll do it. And I tell them, look, physical preparation is important because it will enable you to perform better, to have a longer career. It will make you healthier, it will help you feel more powerful when competition time comes. Don't train like a puppet. If you don't believe in our training program, you will never achieve the results you want. Now, I want to share a rule with you. Actually, 2 rules with you. In Spanish, I call them plof and pliff. These 2 rules. 97% of the things we call and deem unforeseeable are actually fully predictable. And if you're able to predict accidents, objections that your athletes might raise, you'll be able to counter them and prevent them. And people will admire you. A frequent objection is, look, what is this exercise for? What is this for? If you can't answer it, you're missing out on a golden opportunity for, well, your persona as a professional to be perceived of as sensationally more competent. You'll miss out on that opportunity. You'll miss out on the opportunity of creating engagement, connection, extra motivation. Be ready to respond to objections and to prevent accidents when they ask you, what is this exercise, what is this type of work for? Be able to answer that question and don't come up with a long-winded response that nobody could possibly understand. Don't beat about the bush, just answer straight away. Somebody asks you Well, if all of your athletes ask you frequently, hey, can I cut down on my carbs? If you know that the general population is interested in intermittent fasting, in different types of training, study up about them. If someone wants to know whether a particular exercise is apt for preventing injuries, study up about it, find out why that is. All of those questions are easily predicted, and if you do predict them, then you'll be able to answer them and to counter objections. And this means that your authority as a professional will grow exponentially. This is very, very important. So think about this, please. Sit down, think about the plough and pliff rules. What are the most frequent objections? What are the most frequent accidents that happen at your workplace? Try and predict those and be able to counter them and prevent them. Because, once again, it will help you be perceived of as a better professional. I'll give you an example. In sports, it's quite common for people to work in pairs, trios, groups of 4. But maybe one group will be short one person, or 2 people short. How's that possible? That you don't have a strategy, an answer, a solution for this scenario. It needs to be an effective solution, which, by the way, incidentally, also happens to show that you're a good professional, that you're good at what you do. This happens all the time. I was talking to a teammate the other day, and I came up with an acronym for the type of responses you can get, a practical tool for persuasion. The acronym I came up with is SUPRA. You can note it down if you want, because I don't think my slides say what it stands for. Your responses need to be simple to understand. That doesn't mean that you can't use complex words. But if you do, make sure you're speaking to somebody who's able to understand them. If you're talking to somebody who wouldn't know what those words mean, then use different ones. Make sure you're understood when you speak. So your response, first of all, needs to be simple. And the second element is probably the most important. Right now, you who are looking at me right now, watching me give this presentation, are pondering about whether this could actually be of any use to you. And you're thinking about, if it could, how you could use this knowledge. This is something that all human beings do. If we all did it, of course, we wouldn't be confronted with so much useless and pointless information all the time. So the second letter U stands for useful. Make sure you only provide useful information. The P stands for precise, precision in what you say. Be accurate, be precise. Don't digress. Don't drop into useless, pointless anecdotes. Don't get lost. Be accurate, be precise. The R stands for reduced. Attention spans aren't infinitely long, so be concise. And the A stands for agile, be agile. Rodrigo Corrales, I remember fondly this moment. This is one of the earliest experiences I have had in handball. Orlando Olivos asked me, and he was the best pivot in the world at the time, I gave him an exercise to perform, and he asked me, is this going to prevent injuries? And I, after training my communication skills and having amassed a great wealth of knowledge in my profession, I said, yes. Quick response, yes. It's going to prevent injury. Now, this is the same response in the longest form. Why am I telling you this? Because people are interested in, well, having their questions answered as concisely as possible. So you give them that first. Even if that is not 100% accurate. The first response you give when you're asked a very direct question is basically your headline, but that is nuanced, so it doesn't matter if it's not 100% truthful. So yes, this will help you experience fewer injuries, but the full response, Rodrigo, is this. In this field, we deal in probabilities. Everything in life is about probabilities. I always say, if you want guarantees, buy a washing machine, buy a home appliance. The rest doesn't come with one. And the rest is all about probabilities. And we need to tip the scale in your favor. So, yes, we'll be doing this other exercise. We will be performing a number of exercises in this order. And this is geared towards keeping the chances of getting injured at a minimum, at bay. So there's no guarantee, but it's going to help. To wrap up, a good answer needs to be prepared in advance, and it needs to be supra. I won't be reminding you what that stood for because I'd like you to remember. If not, just go back over the presentation and you remember. The evolution of the people you're working with, that you need to communicate to, is dependent upon this wheel.
We all want results. Results need to be optimal. No exception about that. But in order to have optimal results, note this down in bold letters and underline it. You need to have the highest level of commitment in any action that is going to be important to be taken for these results to be accomplished. 101% of commitment. And to generate that commitment, note this down, not only in bold letters and underline, but in fluorescent letter. You need to be in the good mood. You need to be you need to have willingness. This is what I try to do with my students. This is what I try to do, as we've seen on the first slides. I try you to have a positive willingness so that you, with that positive willingness, if I keep on moving you, I can create a commitment in the actions that I'm asking you to do. Either, well, note this down, take this into account. I create that commitment, and that commitment is the one that will make you remember that you have a structure, you have a sketch on your notebook, etc., so that tomorrow you can implement all this. Willingness takes to commitment. Commitment takes to making it happen or making it possible to have better results. And from there, if you have better results, you have more odds to have better results. It's probable that your willingness improves again. So when we speak about communication strategies that I've already told you about in order to be applicable in the sports world, this is not about being nice, okay? That's not the goal. Maybe that could be the consequence. That goal to me is a poor goal. This is about being able to really have your best self, everything you have in your mind, all these papers, all these books, all that background, all your expertise, to be able to convey it efficiently, all your passion that is in your heart, to be able to take it out. And besides, you have strategies that you know that work, that have a positive impact on the person. They open their eyes and they say, hey, I want to listen to, I want to hear more. Give me. So that will make them create better results, because that willingness goes hand in hand with being compromised on a daily basis. And this is what takes you to results. And I repeat it again. We're not talking about art, because many people think that this is just about flying hours. So the more lessons I teach, the better I will be as a teacher. False. The more training sessions I hold, the better I will be as a coach. That's false. Or the more customers I have as a nutritionist, the better nutritionist I will be. False too. What you need to do is to be trained with these tools that will pave the way for that efficiency, to reflect on them, to see how they're working until they fit like a glove. So remember that production level, to have a positive willingness for 101% commitment for good results or for the best possible results, and that would take us back to willingness. Why does this work? Why should we use the tools that I've talked to you about and that I'm going to keep on talking about are working? Because the text of all the scientific evidences about motivation and persuasion tools, what we can extract from that is that they exist, is that we have in human beings natural triggers that, because of our natural evolution throughout the years, especially in the last decades, they predispose us to specific things. When you see such an ad, it's just an image with a shield and with a sentence. If you start thinking, you can start thinking about what does this brand want to convey. For example, the aspect tells us that we are talking to an expert. Glasses, shirt, robe, etc. That smile, that conveys a feeling of being close, of closeness. The seal conveys that we could have a certification behind, and everything considers that this is important and authority is important, and the sentence that is used by dentists makes you be someone that is not only popular but also popular among the people that are experts in teeth. So this makes you be not only popular in general, but also popular among the experts. So these natural triggers are quite usual in your environment. If you have a look around, you start to remember, for example, just one day of your week, you'll start seeing that we can see all this. When something is expensive, we compare it to, hey, careful, maybe this is either exclusive or, well, maybe good, or both things. It's very cheap. It creates some doubts. Well, maybe it's not very good, or maybe they haven't sold it for other reasons. We all have a look at the opinions, because for us that these opinions, these statements speak about the experiences. So it's very important that everything is clear for us. As a sentence that I think it is important to note down is, please, first and foremost, be aware of your natural triggers that we have. Use them in order to obtain the best results possible. And as you keep on knowing the natural triggers, you will, and this is, by the way, an amazing key, if you know what the natural triggers are, you will protect more from the ones that use lies using natural triggers. And this is quite weird, and this is quite curious, because when you know this, you will know that when an actor is wearing a robe, maybe he's a well-known actor from a TV show because he appeared on ER, TV show, for example, you know that he's wearing that robe to make a piece of ad, because that natural trigger when you see a robe is that he's an expert. And as you know him as an actor, he looks familiar to you. So the more you know about this, the better. Because remember that natural triggers have a positive bias on people. So let's go with something that's very tangible, something that you will be able to use since this very beginning. Everything that I deal with in every certification, in our certification about communication skills, reciprocity. If we had to speak about persuasion, I would start by this one. Science proves in a very clear way, study after study, in many different fields, that we are forced to give back to someone that gives us something, what I call the boomerang effect. When someone gives us something, when you go to a store and your kid is giving a balloon, for example, it has been proven that that balloon entails that you have to spend more, not only in your kid, but maybe you will also spend more in you, up to one third more, just because you feel, and the stores know this, and we should apply it constantly. It's not about making empty gifts. Sometimes our players need to know what we are giving them. Maybe it could be something intangible. I always speak about the things that I do, a thing that could give them an extra value. It's like, hey, I was reviewing your injury record, and I've been reviewing this or that, and with the training sessions, with the training program, I've tried to include this. Hey, it's true, this happened to me, and what you're telling him in that moment is that you've paid attention, you've dedicated time, sometimes you can give him a piece of advice, etc. So let him know this kind of things. I insist. And you have to be honest, you have to be authentic, you have to be true, without making him see that, hey, you need to know that I've done this. No. You have to inform him about what's the point in something, because you have given time to something. And for that, you should be thinking of what you are giving to your customers, people that are that are using your nutritional plan or the training session. Or if you're a teacher, what are you contributing to them? Ask yourself if they perceive the value of that work that you're doing. Because sometimes you perfectly know what you're contributing, but maybe that person is not feeling that value. So you need to think, hey, how can I make these people feel how useful this person is, how much he's improving the problem that it solves, etc. And you tell him naturally, this that I'm contributing, I think that will improve this because of this and that and that. Do you agree? And he would be positively biased. So a step forward. So these are sentences that I've used sometimes. I have like 20 sample sentences, and these are some of them in case you can use them. I've been having a look at the records for a couple of hours about your injury or the injury you've told me about. And from here, I've included in the warm-up protocol all these things. So the small letters is that I've individualized your program. It's like I've given two extra hours. The point is that the small print is that I know how to study all this about specific injuries. So in just one sentence, when someone tells me that this takes time, I say no, it gives you time. This optimizes working time. Because if you don't do this, what happens is that you give a lot of information that is empty. Disperse information. I've included some further sentences. According to your work, according to your job, I'm going to develop an express program. Although I usually don't do this, but in this case I'm going to do it. Because in the last training sessions, you've done this and that. And you need to take that into account. So all these would be direct giveaways. What we could call to apply this reciprocity program to give away something to create that reciprocity. But this works with concessions to add different requests. For example, imagine the situation. The player comes along, I think there's a Militao, and he asks Carleto, please give me the ball. Hey, give me the ball. Give me the ball for a while. We're going to play. We want to play for a while. Said, well, I'm willing to give it to you. Whatever. Hey, thank you very much. I truly appreciate it. But it's like, hey, I need you to commit to X. What do you say? Are you willing to do that? So, when they ask you for something and you give that to them, you have to take advantage of that moment, because it's a moment where 90-something% of possibilities that they will say yes. That concession moment, it is a key moment. If, for example, my students want to delay a deadline, if I need something from them, I will tell them. It's like, okay, fine, you can do it later if you commit to whatever, the best work or the best work in the world, or this was on a voluntary basis, but you have to deliver this too. 90% will say yes. That's a one-stop shop. It is a unique opportunity for life. It works in every field, but in nutrition and sports, it really works very well. And the most interesting thing of reciprocity is that it works with concessions that are self-generated. We see the physical coach of Real Madrid, and he, without the players asking him for that, imagine, they say, we have to do 5 series of sprints. Okay, so let's remove one, but the 4 ones have to be really at 101%. Yes and no. The answer will always be yes. So this works with direct giveaways and with self-generated conditions, and that's the reciprocity principle. And last principle, the principle of connection or sympathy principle, is that we usually give credit to the person that gives credit to us. We give credit to the people that give credit to us, and it's important that to take this into account, especially when creating a relationship. By the way, careful with, for example, instead of praising, we have to praise. We do not have to flatter, okay? It has to be something that has to be totally honest. It has to be genuine, something that you believe in. So you give credit to the effort. You give credit to the behavior they've had. A systematic action that is being developed, a habit that makes him different, something that is authentic, something that has to be specific, like, hey, you rock, man, you are great, so this works much worse. And, but last but not least, if you want this praise to be to work, it has to be something attributable to will rather than to genetics. I mean, for example, if you speak about the fact that, well, you've been born for this speaks about talent, that doesn't work as good as something that says, well, oh my God, you have worked very much and you've reached a great point thanks to that work. You need to try to work hard for this. With these 3 steps, first of all, you need to try to see the good things of the people that you're working with. 2, at least you need to try that this praise fulfills the 2 first features. It has to be something authentic and it has to be something specific, not abstract, okay? And 3, you shouldn't be embarrassed. Sometimes it's like, well, this does not belong to us. Picasso used to say this, who stays at a praise is someone that is having something that does not belong to him. Don't stay there. If you think something positive, convey that, and convey that with generosity, with as much generosity as you can, since that can make the difference. Work on this, because I think it's going to be a turning point. So I'm almost done. I'm going to end up with a small part of the course that I teach about leadership, the private label coach, where we speak about the beginning, how we have to follow every procedure. One of the repeated mistakes that many coaches make is that they get there at the beginning of a coaching session. I think that same happens at the offices, at the doctor office, and they say, well, what we have to do today, what we're going to do is, and you lose a great opportunity to create expectations, to make them bite, to create that adherence. So a good start is an amazing moment for you to develop the highest impact with the people that you're working with. So what is a good start about? So we don't have to say, well, today we have to do this, we have to do that. No. Besides, what you have to do is you need to make them pay attention and not taking for granted that you already have it. There are 4 good starts. Well, truth to be said, there are a few more, but the ones that you're going to prepare in just a moment that will have a great impact are that you have to stay with an eye-catching piece of information that goes directly at the people's heart. Hey, you see that we are failing 60% of passes, for example, and there's a 20% that the goalkeeper gets the ball, grabs the ball with both hands. That's a very striking piece of information that attacks at specific pain that subjects have. And this adapts to any context. 2, very, it has a lot to do with that. You need to speak about an important problem. So, a key problem that usually happens in people that are starting with a fat loss process, the most important problem is, well, if you leave a pause there, you'll see the eyes that they're eagering for that information. So that's the strength you have. If you fill that in the right way with the next sentence, you have attention, motivation, and expectations. And authority, you have a great combination. 3, a sentence that could create a great impact. We started with that. We said communication is the most contradictory skill that exists. And maybe some of you could have thought, hey, what the hell does that mean? This is what I'm talking about. And 4, an attracting question, something that could create attraction. Hey, are you interested in knowing what's the most efficient method to accomplish the optimal combination between losing fat, increasing the cardiorespiratory level to accomplish a little bit of a muscle mass in a very short time? Well, I've just improvised this, thinking of a previous talk about heat, etc., and the information that we've seen. Are you interested in that? Yeah, I'm interested, and you explain that heat, and that's the attracting question. And this is what we are talking about at the course. And this way, we would have the 9 strategies, and I'll give you a gift, as I promised, the 9 strategies to settle your communication, your persuasion, and the way you will connect with the people that you're training with. So for all of you that just now, it's 8:15, if you, well, you have 5 minutes. If you send me an email in the next 5 minutes, I'll give you another document that has nothing to do with what we've been talking about today. It's about nonverbal communication. From 8:15 to 8:20, you have time to do that. Any of you that wants to talk to me via social media, it will be delighted. The more love and heart you put, the better. For the university, these events are amazing. We do sound checks, everything. There's a great group of professionals behind the scenes. So the more you can open to all this, the better. I truly appreciate this. If you want to send me an email with any doubt, any problem, what has resonated with you the most, where do you think that this can be especially useful, I will be delighted to send my answer to everything you tell me. And I always end up, many times, with a sentence, because I think that this is golden and it changed my life. This is my thesis supervisor that was the one who put me in my way when I was speaking about the connection problems with my athletes. He said, the best train, the best planned training with your graph, etc. He said, without a soul, that's a mediocre training session. So I thought about it, I kept it in my heart, I thought about it, and the consequence is that 20 years later, I think that I have improved everything that I convey. Well, maybe I'm not that different, but in tools that I use to convey everything, I think that I've done it. A great pleasure. If you want to ask me anything, I'm fully available for you. I think that we are sticking to time. I hope that at least it has resonated something, and I hope that we can meet again very soon. Thank you.
Está como un poco congelado.
Well, I think things are a little bit frozen, I think.
Ahora.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid formamos jugadores para que lleguen a primer equipo, sino que también formamos personas.
Uno como estudiante viene aquí para ver, ¿verdad?, cómo uno puede crecer como profesional, y es el inicio de ese proceso de crecimiento profesional que la universidad nos está brindando.
Elegí en su momento estudiar aquí por el prestigio que supone el Real Madrid, la marca, y también la Universidad Europea.
Creo que de las mejores opciones que puedo elegir estar en el Real Madrid, solo la marca Real Madrid ya te abre muchísimas puertas.
Campeones se pueden formar en todos los aspectos de la vida. Lo importante es saber ser un campeón.
Cuando quieres mejorar cada día, no estar satisfecho con lo que hiciste ayer, creo que para mí eso es lo que te hace ganar día a día.
Realmente lo que más se aprende es a establecer nuevos contactos. Eso es imprescindible para los proyectos profesionales.
Pero nuestro espíritu ganador nos caracteriza, y nos caracteriza no porque lo decimos nosotros, sino porque nos reconocen los demás.
Yo creo que la llave para tener éxito es hacer algo que lo pueda hacer con pasión.
El trabajo en equipo se mantenga independientemente del resultado.
Esos valores se adquieren cuando tú ya tienes ese compromiso desde que entras al club, ¿no? Y al final tú vas haciendo una especie de pasar el testigo con los que van viniendo después.
Y tener las herramientas y los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poder liderar una transformación que tiene que darse ya en este tipo de industria.
There's really no other opportunity like this in the world.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid formamos jugadores para que lleguen a primer equipo, sino que también formamos personas.
Uno como estudiante viene aquí para ver, ¿verdad?, cómo uno puede crecer como profesional, y es el inicio de ese proceso de crecimiento profesional que la universidad nos está brindando.
Elegí en su momento estudiar aquí por el prestigio que supone el Real Madrid, la marca, y también la Universidad Europea.
Creo que de las mejores opciones que puedo elegir estar en el Real Madrid, solo la marca Real Madrid ya te abre muchísimas puertas.
Campeones se pueden formar en todos los aspectos de la vida. Lo importante es saber ser un campeón.
Cuando quieres mejorar cada día, no estar satisfecho con lo que hiciste ayer, Creo que para mí eso es lo que te hace ganar día a día.
Realmente lo que más se aprende es a establecer nuevos contactos. Eso es imprescindible para los proyectos profesionales.
Pero nuestro espíritu ganador nos caracteriza, y nos caracteriza no porque lo decimos nosotros, sino porque nos reconocen los demás.
Yo creo que la llave para tener éxito es hacer algo que tú puedes hacer con pasión.
El trabajo en equipo se mantenga independientemente del resultado.
Esos valores se adquieren cuando tú ya tienes ese compromiso desde que entras al club, ¿no? Y al final tú vas haciendo una especie de pasar el testigo con los que van viniendo después.
Y tener las herramientas y los conocimientos técnicos necesarios para poder liderar una transformación que tiene que darse ya en este tipo de industria.
There's really no other opportunity like this in the world.
Nuestra escuela universitaria es una realidad sólida y nuestro proyecto académico está muy consolidado. Nos habéis elegido a nosotros. Es un honor y también una gran responsabilidad.
No solo en el Real Madrid forma.
What feeds effort? What feeds motivation? What feeds victory? With the most advanced scientific research, with the quality of the best ingredients, protecting people's health without banned substances and with transparency. Crown Sport Nutrition, your personal best brand.